Chapter 247. Sillin didn't know why Goryo's expression was so awkward every time he mentioned Guanfeng's treat, but Goryo didn't explain. He simply said, "You'll know when the time comes." It was Goryo's first time at AF1, so he was showing Sillin the way around. Normally, when he was really busy, he would have to go to 3 places: the apartment, the school building, and the training field. Therefore, he had to be familiar with these 3 places. Although we're all under Teacher Guan's tutelage, he usually doesn't spend too much time teaching us. We have to submit a summary report every once in a while about our studies and work. It's a different story if we're on a mission. Don't think that it's easy to write a summary report. Teacher Guan didn't ask for a word count, but there are still some things you need to pay attention to. On the way to Guanfeng's residence, Goryo explained to Sillin about his daily work and Guanfeng's requirements. The biggest difference between this place and Seven Lights was the freedom and standards. At AF1, the instructors wouldn't spend a lot of time teaching you what to do and what not to do. They only taught you skills, and it was up to you how much you could learn from them. The courses they chose were all taught by the people of the Royal Academy of Sciences, and the only thing that mattered was the different requirements and standards of the instructors. Everyone in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire knew that Guanfeng's standards were very high. But compared to Guanfeng's high standards, Guanfeng treated his disciples pretty well. If they needed flying cars, aircrafts, and so on, they could ask Guanfeng to pick them up directly. It would be a waste not to use them. Guanfeng wasn't stingy when it came to paying his students either. His salary was among the top 5 in both AF1 and AF2. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about his daily expenses even if he wasn't on a mission. In fact, Guanfeng didn't really control his students too much. To put it bluntly, even if his students committed murder or arson, they were fine as long as they met Guanfeng's requirements. For example, Guanfeng's minimum training target was 99%. As long as they could reach this target, Guanfeng wouldn't have any objections even if they committed murder or arson. This was also the reason why Guanfeng was so mysterious. Before Sillin, the students under Guanfeng's tutelage who hadn't officially graduated from AF1 were his senior brother Pastura and senior sister Fu Qingqing. They belonged to the 2 main armies of the empire, and Goryo belonged to the wing of the 2 armies. However, Guanfeng didn't care if the 3 of them had a conflict in private. Guanfeng wouldn't care even if Sillin joined the rebel army in the future. Teachers like Guanfeng had their own residential area outside the 3 affiliated schools. Goryo brought Sillin to Guanfeng's residence. Guanfeng's house had a classical style to it. There was a small courtyard outside that was filled with flowers and plants. It looked pretty cozy. However, the 2 people sitting in the living room made the cozy house feel a few degrees colder after they entered. There were 2 people sitting on the sofa in the living room: senior brother Pastura and senior sister Fu Qingqing. Both of them had a stern look on their faces. Honestly speaking, they would have attracted a lot of men and women if they looked a little gentler, but not only were they wearing stern looks, they didn't look good at all. Their auras were so strong that no one dared to say anything even if they wanted to liven up the atmosphere. Pastura and Fu Qingqing turned around at the same time when they saw Sillin walk in. They shot Sillin a displeased look before nodding at Goryo. Then they returned their attention to the RAS academician's recent speeches on the big screen. Goryo was obviously used to this kind of situation. He motioned for Sillin not to worry, and went to the kitchen to check on the situation. Goryo returned just as Sillin sat down. "I just reported to Teacher Guan. He's cooking right now." And so, all 4 of Guanfeng's students sat on the long, big sofa in the living room, and watched the academician's speech. The atmosphere was pretty strange. Sillin felt that Pastura and Fu Qingqing were obviously hostile towards him. Or more accurately, it was resentment. Was it really like Goryo said? Guanfeng was the only one who allowed Sillin to use the PTSK? Pastura and Fu Qingqing weren't the only ones who looked like Goryo's mouth had stiffened after he came in. Sillin didn't say anything when he saw that none of them were planning to say anything. He simply watched the speech with them. Huimao obediently squatted on the sofa to show his politeness. No one objected when he jumped onto the sofa. 5 minutes later, Huimao was itching all over his body. His gaze subconsciously drifted towards the big fish tank on the other side of the living room. The fish in there are so fat. Huimao's paws itched when he saw how much they were swimming. Huimao glanced at Silin and moved his butt backward again and again. Meow meow, I'm not going to keep you guys company anymore. He ran to the big fish tank like a wisp of smoke, jumped onto it and crouched at the edge of the bathtub. The 4 people on the sofa had been paying attention to Huimao when Huimao jumped into the fish tank. They didn't stop the cat from jumping onto the fish tank for different reasons. There was a unique vent above the fish tank, allowing the fragrance of flowers and grass from the courtyard outside to enter along with the wind. It smelled very comfortable. The gray cat crouched at the edge of the fish tank and watched the fish inside. It felt like it was going to sleep as it felt the warm light shining in from outside the window and basking in the gentle breeze. It closed its eyes and felt sleepy. Pop! One of the fish seemed to be a bit hostile towards the animal's appearance. It jumped out of the water and spat out a pillar of water. The hair on Huimao's head was wet from the water the fish spat out. Silin understood now. No wonder Goryo and the others didn't stop him. They just wanted to see Huimao suffer. The fish raised its head, and when the other fish saw what its companion was doing, they too jumped up and sprayed water at the gray cat. Huimao was drowsy and didn't notice when the first fish sprayed water, but he was much more awake now that he was sprayed. It wasn't easy for the men behind him to spray him, but there were too many of them. Huimao couldn't avoid being sprayed no matter how he jumped around. These fish sprayed water very quickly and moved very quickly. They were very agile. They weren't just good-looking. The wind grew a little stronger, and Wheeze's warmth was taken away by the sun's rays. It flicked away the water droplets on its ears and wagged its tail. Based on Silin's understanding of Wheeze, he knew that it must have come up with some wicked idea again. As expected, Huimao found an angle in the next moment and raised his tail, ignoring the fish spraying at him. Piss against the wind. Pitter-patter-patter, Silin, Goryo, Fu Qingqing and Pastura. Can you be any more embarrassing than this? Silin really wanted to stuff the cat into a crack in the ground. What kind of cat would pee on a tank full of fish in a situation like this? Guanfeng walked out with a plate in his hands and saw his 4 students staring at the fat cat, acting like a hooligan to a tank full of fish. He had to admit that the fish had become a lot more docile after Huimao had peed on the fish tank. They didn't jump up and spray water anymore. Silin guessed that they were too busy vomiting. Guanfeng put down the plate and went back to the kitchen without saying anything. Silin coughed once to remind the fat cat to mind its place. Huimao understood Silin's meaning and shook off the water droplets on its body. Then, it ran to the dryer to dry its fur, and lay down next to Silin. It licked its fur, looked at Silin, and then at the fur on its back. What it meant was, "Come on, let's stroke it." Silin thinks, this cat is getting more and more insatiable. It didn't take long for Guanfeng to bring out all the dishes on the table. Silin suddenly understood why everyone looked like they were on their way to the execution ground when he saw the dishes on the table. Color, fragrance, and taste. At the very least, color and fragrance had nothing to do with each other. As for taste, Silin could tell from Goryo and the other two's expressions that taste might not necessarily be better than color and fragrance. The 4 of them sat down around the table with a plate in front of them. Then, Guanfeng added a spoonful of something muddy onto each of their plates. Silin glanced at Goryo and asked with his eyes, "What the hell is this shit green mud?" Goryo shot Silin a look that said, "Good luck to you." Then he lowered his eyes and let Guanfeng add food onto their plates just like Pastura and Fu Qingqing. Aside from Silin and the other 3, Huimao's seat was also on the table. The food on his plate was exactly the same as Silin and the other 3's. Huimao crouched on his elevated seat and stared at the pile of food on his plate. He glanced at Silin and the others, and when he saw that no one was eating, he resisted the urge to stick out his tongue and lick the food. When he was finally done refilling everyone's plates, Guanfeng sat down and clapped his hands. "All right, Silin is our new member today. It's been a long time since we last met up." Goryo, Pastura, and Fu Qingqing curled their lips inwardly. "We met 30 days ago. Even the other instructors wouldn't complain if they didn't meet for a few hundred days. All right, let's cut to the chase. Let's begin. This is the first time you've eaten my cooking, Silin, so enjoy it. This is a nutritious meal, not something the trash you can buy outside can compare to." Guanfeng took the lead and started eating with his spoon. Goryo and the others sucked in a deep breath and started eating as well. Pastura's face was ashen as he mechanically put the spoon into his mouth. The veins on Fu Qingqing's forehead bulged, but her face remained expressionless. They had experienced what Silin was feeling the moment he took his first spoon. It really wasn't something the junk food sold outside could compare to. At the very least, junk food could stimulate one's appetite, but these nutritious meals of love made one seriously nauseous. Silin endured the discomfort. He had to adapt to it since Goryo and the others had gotten used to it. Then, under self-hypnosis, Silin put the spoon into his mouth mechanically just like Pastura and the others. They screamed in their heads. It's not that we don't want to eat, it's that our intestines are rejecting it. As for Huimao, he was eating with gusto. Instructor Guanfeng, this is the best lunch I've ever had. Cough, cough, cough. Goryo, who was choking, could no longer care about the bitter gourd juice in his cup. He poured the juice into his mouth with a twisted expression. Pastura choked, and Fu Qingqing's eyes widened in disbelief. Delicious? The best? Are you kidding me? Are you sure you're not just flattering me to cover up the mistake you made with that tank of Ziyu? After confirming that Huimao wasn't joking, Guanfeng chuckled. Whis really knows what's good and what's good. Unlike those four brats, they're as blind as a bat. Amen, that's right. Huimao nodded in agreement. That's right. Guanfeng didn't like to talk during meals, and neither did Goryo and the others. It was because they didn't want their numb swallowing process to be interrupted. Silin felt like he had fought a tough battle when he finally finished the meal. However, Silin realized that Guanfeng was telling the truth through his body's absorption of the food. These nutritious meals were very beneficial to the human body. One would only realize it after eating them. Pastura and Fu Qingqing looked a lot better after the meal. They didn't look as resentful as before when they looked at Silin. Silin finally understood that he wasn't the main reason for their attitude earlier. Guanfeng chatted with the four of them for a while, and Pastura, Fu Qingqing, and Goryo also gave him a report on their recent training, and some of the problems they ran into during their training. They wouldn't talk about their personal matters here because Guanfeng said that he wasn't going to interfere with them. He wouldn't interfere even if the Imperial Guard and the United Garrison Army started fighting each other. Silin listened to their reporting methods and key points. He would have to report to Guanfeng like this next time. Not bad. Guanfeng wasn't stingy with his praise. Ask them if you have any questions, Silin. Come to me if you really can't figure them out. Goryo has told you everything you need to pay attention to, right? I won't repeat them. You should familiarize yourself with them first. Guanfeng left and went upstairs after saying this. Where are you going, Teacher Guan? Silin asked after Guanfeng went upstairs. Taking a nap. Goryo and Fu Qingqing were the ones who did most of the talking. Pastura was the one who said the least, and his face was still expressionless. After talking for a while, they dispersed and went their separate ways. Don't you need to tell Teacher Guan? Silin asked. You'll get shot if you interrupt his afternoon nap for something like this, Goryo said confidently. Do you need to clean that up? Silin pointed at the fish tank Huimao had pissed on. No, I'll get a new one tomorrow. Alright, Silin didn't ask any more questions. There was no reason for him to care if Huimao didn't care. He grabbed Huimao and boarded Goryo's flying car. Pastura and Fu Qingqing had already left, so Goryo sent Silin back to his apartment. Before he left, he said to Silin, don't forget to ask for a flying car from Teacher Guan. It'll be easier to move around the planet. Don't worry, Teacher Guan has plenty of them. Silin thanked him and prepared to take a good rest. But the doorbell rang not long after he laid down. Silin looked at the image displayed on the monitor and opened the door. There were 3 people standing outside the door. Zhen Xingming, Zhen Xingyao, and a slightly older man who looked somewhat similar to the first 2. He was probably Zhen Xingming's older brother, Zhen Xingchen, who had been raised as the heir to the throne since young. Compared to Zhen Xingyao's calm demeanor, Zhen Xingchen had more of the dignified air of a ruler. Even though he hadn't officially inherited the throne yet, just standing there quietly was enough to make people feel pressured. Silin wasn't surprised that they knew his apartment and his route so quickly. They wouldn't have timed him so precisely otherwise. They were royalty after all. Sillin would have suspected that the Gen family had declined if they didn't even have this much ability. Come in first. Celine invited the three of them in. There were still some Gen family members hiding in the shadows, but they had no intention of following them in. Gen Xingqian wouldn't let them in either. Gen Xingqian didn't want even his most loyal subordinates to know about the Gen family's internal affairs. Huimao was lying on his bed with his eyes closed. He looked like he was asleep, but the twitching of his ears every now and then showed that he knew everything that was going on in the living room. We just moved in today, so we don't have much to entertain you with. Sillin pulled out a chair and sat down in front of the trio. If that's the case, then let's get straight to the point, Gen Xingqian said. Gen Xingming and Gen Xingyao didn't interrupt too much since Gen Xingqian was here. Gen Xingqian paused for a moment before turning to Gen Xingming. You go into the room first. What? Gen Xingming was about to voice his opinion when Gen Xingqian glared at him. He swallowed his words and murmured, Second brother is here too, so you just kicked me out. Xingyao, go in as well, Gen Xingqian said. Gen Xingyao clenched his fists tightly and narrowed his eyes at Gen Xingming. Gen Xingming curled his lips and walked into the bedroom. Although he was unwilling, Gen Xingyao still followed him into the bedroom. Do you want to talk in the study? Sillin asked. No need. Gen Xingqian stared at Sillin carefully, but he really couldn't find any resemblance between him and a member of the Gen family. Therefore he moved his gaze to Sillin's left thumb and said, I want to see the Fuji tattoo on your hand. Sillin took off his glove and stuck out his thumb with the leaf pattern, so that Gen Xingqian could observe it better. In truth, Sillin was also puzzled. Why wasn't the ring reacting? Even in front of the future king of estimation. It wasn't as if Sillin hadn't suspected that Genya had fallen into a trap back then, but when he thought about it, Genya had never complained about anything. In fact, he often expressed his longing for his hometown. Genya's final words to Sillin didn't sound like the Gen family harbored any ill will towards Genya. In fact, Genya only wanted to return to the Gen family. After some thought, Sillin finally decided to show the leaf pattern to Gen Xingyao and the others. This way, things could progress a little. It really is the real Fuji pattern. Gen Xingqian showed a leaf pattern on his wrist to Sillin as well. The leaf pattern on Gen Xingqian's wrist was very similar to the one on Sillin's thumb, but there were still some differences. It was as if there were no two leaves in the world that were exactly the same. Those who possess the Fuji pattern are all people closely related to King Fuji. For example, me Xingming and Xingyao because our father is King Fuji. But what about you? Who are you? Sillin shook his head. I promised someone that I wouldn't tell them the reason or the original owner of this Fuji pattern before the ring gives me a hint. Gen Xingqian wasn't surprised. He had already expected this. As far as I know, only my grandfather's generation had a Fuji pattern like yours, and my grandfather was that generation's King Fuji. Chapter 248. Sillin didn't comment on Gen Xingqian's claim. He simply kept quiet, neither denying nor confirming it. No one could be sure of this. If Gen Xingqian's claim was true, then this matter was related to the generation before him. The only way Gen Xingqian could get to the bottom of this was to ask his grandfather, the previous King Fuji. However, his grandfather hadn't been involved in politics for many years now. He only showed up once or twice a year to ask about the younger generation. Even though Gen Xingqian was the next heir to King Fuji's throne and the one who spoke the most to him among the younger generation, this most was limited to 10 sentences. Therefore, Gen Xingqian didn't know much about the matters of that generation. This time, after Gen Xingyao and Gen Xingming told Gen Xingqian about Sillin, Gen Xingqian showed up in person. He didn't alert his father or anyone else in the Gen family. Gen Xingqian didn't get much useful information from Sillin since he walked through the door, but he was still very polite. However, if the Fuji tattoo on Sillin's hand wasn't the same as his grandfather's, then Gen Xingqian's attitude toward Sillin would have been different. If he was the same generation as Sillin, he might have forced Sillin to tell him more information even if Sillin was Guanfeng's student. At the same time, at Guanfeng's residence, inside the living room, Guanfeng was sitting on the sofa with a serious expression on his face. It was the complete opposite of his usual genteel and gentlemanly persona. In fact, he looked very similar to Pastura right now. There were 3 people sitting on the guest seats opposite Guanfeng, and one of them had a bullet hole in his collar. The trio exchanged glances with each other to see who would speak first. After all, it wasn't a good idea to wake up Guanfeng from his afternoon nap. Ahem. The leftmost person was probably the one with the highest position among the trio, so he was the one who spoke first. Guanfeng, we know your habits. We wouldn't have bothered you if we weren't pressed for time. Guanfeng looked at him with the same cold expression. Spit it out if you have something to say. If the students outside heard Guanfeng's words, their jaws would definitely drop to the ground. Who would have thought that Guanfeng would actually swear? You're done venting your anger. Look, you almost cut off my neck. The man in the middle said. Guanfeng raised an eyebrow. I know it's you. Why else do you think your neck is still intact? Seeing that Guanfeng was clearly losing his patience, the leftmost man finally revealed the purpose of their visit after the other 2 signaled with their eyes. Do you know about sea blue gold? The man asked. Sea blue gold was a type of alloy. It was also the main building material for deep-sea probes and submarines so far. However, the proportions of various alloys and the types of some ultra-micro elements in sea blue gold were not fixed. The relevant researchers had been doing research to upgrade the alloy formula of sea blue gold. I don't want to waste my breath, Guanfeng said expressionlessly. Although he wasn't one of the researchers, he knew a lot of things about it. All right. The man took out an electronic file and passed it to Guanfeng. He explained, this is an image and analysis table we received a while ago. The sea blue gold mentioned in it is better than the sea blue gold we're using right now. This means that the sea blue gold formula used in this probe is more advanced than the one we're using right now. Guanfeng looked at the explanation on the electronic file before turning to the trio and saying disdainfully, not even the academicians of the RAS could come up with a better formula than this? No. The trio felt ashamed when they heard this. Although there were very few people who specialized in sea blue gold, it was true that they couldn't come up with a better formula than this one. That being said, they were motivated when they thought of the formula. You know that the Abyss project has reached a critical stage, but we ran into a bottleneck a few days ago. If we have this upgraded sea blue gold, we'll be able to overcome it very quickly. Guanfeng tossed the electronic file back and smacked his forehead. He knew about the Abyss project. It was one of the top 10 projects of the RAS right now. A few days ago, he heard that the Abyss project had run into a problem that they couldn't solve until now. Now that they had found a way to solve it, it was no wonder that they were in such a hurry and interrupted Guanfeng's lunch break to explain it to him. However, what does this have to do with me? I'm not a member of the Abyss project, Guanfeng said while crossing his legs on the sofa. The man rubbed his hands together. The person with the upgraded sea blue gold formula is in the 19th star region of the Empire. We tried to contact him from afar, but the situation over there is pretty complicated. That's why we're going to send someone to talk to him face to face. We can let him enter the RAS, skip the honorary scholar title, and become an academician straight away. We'll send someone to talk to him, but we'll need an escort. Guanfeng cut him off before he could finish. Get lost. My student isn't a bodyguard, and he doesn't have the time or energy to be your bodyguard. Sigh, they count as bodyguards. We have the military escorting them, but it's better to take some of the RAS own people with us. We've already transferred some students from AF1 and AF2, and you, Guanfeng, are our top priority. Everyone's hoping that you'll send a student to join us. He was the vice dean of the RAS, so he couldn't fly into a rage even if he was told to get lost. There was no helping it. He'd promised those people that he would get a student from Guanfeng. Guanfeng was very popular. After all, he was famous, and every single one of his students was being fought over by all parties. Pastura, Fuqingqing, and Goryeo had all been booked by 3 parties before they even graduated. It was obvious how popular they were. This meant that although the Abyss project team was the one who proposed this, the higher-ups of the RAS had taken the opportunity to recruit some of their students and warm up the project in advance. They had transferred some of their students from several famous teachers to cultivate their relationship with the RAS. This way, Even if these students left the affiliated schools and joined other forces in the future, they would still be connected to the RES to a certain extent. They wouldn't just be tied to their courses and education. Although the people of the RES tended to be arrogant most of the time, they couldn't pretend to be aloof and virtuous. It was something that even the higher-ups understood. Guanfeng was without a doubt a delicious cake in everyone's eyes. He was an imperial tutor and the leader of the firearms engineering project. Every one of his students was a famous figure. Even Pastura, Fu Qingqing and Goryo, who were still young and inexperienced, would be known by everyone in the empire in a few years' time. Guanfeng waved a hand. They're all busy with something. That's because I heard that you accepted a new student. The new student doesn't have any other missions, and the new course hasn't started yet. A lot of people knew about Guanfeng's new student, and they'd been eyeing him ever since. No way. I haven't even warmed my hands yet, and you're already dragging me away? How can there be such a good deal in the world? The trio's eyes lit up when they heard Guanfeng's words. It wasn't a forceful rejection, which meant that there was still room for negotiation. Sillin didn't know what his new teacher had discussed with the others, and he hadn't made much progress in his conversation with Zhen Xingchen either. Both sides were holding back and not revealing too much. Zhen Xingchen moved his fingers and looked at Sillin. When will the Fuji tattoo on your finger give you a notification? I'm not sure myself. I thought it would when I saw you guys, but unfortunately it didn't. It was why Sillin had shown up in front of them. Since that's the case, I can only go and ask Grandpa first. However, Zhen Xingchen stared straight at Sillin and said solemnly, I hope you can keep this a secret before I figure out what's going on. Of course I understand. Zhen Xingchen looked at the time, stood up and said to Sillin, Since we've finally met, let's have a meal together. Sillin couldn't refuse the future King Fuji's request, so he was about to agree when his communicator rang. After looking at the display, Sillin apologized to Zhen Xingchen and went to his study to answer the call. What's wrong? Weren't you taking an afternoon nap? Sillin asked while looking at Guanfeng's image. I was woken up by someone. Guanfeng's expression had returned to his usual one. Pack your things, I have a mission for you. I'll tell the school about your curriculum, so come to my place after you're done. I'll give you 2 hours. All right. After the call was over, Sillin walked out of his study and said to Zhen Xingchen, I'm sorry, but there's been a change of plans. I've been summoned by Teacher Guan for a mission. I won't force you to do it since it's a mission Teacher Guan gave you. Do your best. Zhen Xingchen didn't mind at all. It was a good opportunity to ask his grandfather if he had any brothers or sisters back in the day while Sillin was away on a mission. Zhen Xingming and Zhen Xingyao didn't manage to pry any useful information out of Weeze's mouth no matter how hard they tried. When Zhen Xingchen called them out of the room, both of them were filled with questions, and they were hoping that Zhen Xingchen would answer them. However, Zhen Xingchen dragged them away without saying a word. He's going to Fox Guan's place again? Huimao wagged his tail. Are you sure he's not trying to avenge his fish? You're overthinking things. Sillin dragged Huimao out of the house. He didn't have a flying car yet, so he could only take AF1's loop line train. When Sillin arrived at Guanfeng's house, the man was bending over and pruning his flowering tree in the yard. He looked to be in a good mood. You're here? Guanfeng said while cutting a branch with a pair of shears. There's a document on the living room table. Take a look first. Sillin came to the living room and read through the document. He had a general idea of the mission this time. Are you done? Guanfeng walked into the room and tossed another electronic file to Sillin. This is the highest grade C blue gold formula the RES is currently using. Memorize it, and once you're there, confirm the authenticity of the formula the old geezers told you. If it's really C blue gold, get them a new formula. Sillin nodded and asked, what do we get out of this mission? Guanfeng could have turned down the offer if he wanted to, but he accepted it anyway. Guanfeng held up 2 fingers. See blue gold. I'll be able to develop Purgatory Thunder Snake S with these 2 items. Purgatory Thunder Snake S. Yeah, I was just imagining it before, but now it's time to give it a try. Guanfeng tossed an imperial debit card to Sillin. I've paid you half of your salary in advance. The other half will be given to you along with the mission rewards. Sillin swiped the debit card on a special card slot next to the communicator and stared at the amount displayed on it. Weeze's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Goryo was right. Guanfeng wasn't stingy with his students. Sillin put away the card, and Guanfeng tossed a box to Sillin. Inside were some emergency medicine and compressed food that couldn't be bought outside. Some of them were distributed internally, and some were made by Guanfeng himself. If he really sold them, they'd be worth a lot of money. After explaining the medicine and food to Sillin, Guanfeng added, "The RES has a special signal network. You can contact me through the communicator as long as you're not in a severely disrupted area or isolated area." Understood. Amen. If there's nothing else, you can wait in the yard. A flying car will come to pick you up in a bit. Oh right, I don't really care about my students, but there's one thing I must emphasize. I'm all ears. Students of different instructors participate in every mission, so it's inevitable that there will be some friction between students. But don't embarrass me. Understood. Guanfeng's meaning was clear to Sillin. To put it simply, he could fight, but he couldn't lose. After that, Guanfeng closed the door and left Sillin in the yard to wait for a car. As expected, a flying car came to pick up Sillin before long. It was an autopilot car, and it took Sillin to a port. Chapter 249. Everything had been arranged, so all Sillin needed to do was to move his feet. The rendezvous point wasn't on this planet, but on an inconspicuous satellite planet. We haven't been here for long, and we're already going on a long journey. We don't even have time to rest, Huimao muttered. He was planning to greet Bonner and King Kong, but he was sent away again as soon as he landed. Didn't Chang San and Chang Si say that students should prioritize their studies? Why did the affiliated schools not fit this rule at all? Sillin scratched Huimao's chin. It's not a bad idea. At least it'll give everyone some time to prepare. The capital star region is the absolute territory of the Emperor and 3 kings. We won't be able to escape if there's an unavoidable conflict. Huimao flicked his ears. Sillin, what's your relationship with the Gen family? I've checked and confirmed that you're not related by blood. Why do they keep coming to you? It's a long story. This was the only word Sillin could use to sum it up. All right, let's not talk about it if it's too long. Huimao narrowed his eyes and started dozing off. The satellite planet was smaller than the preparatory campus planet, but judging from the buildings and facilities, the importance of this planet was no less than that of the preparatory planet. The spaceplane landed next to a tall cylindrical building. This building was the rendezvous point Sillin was heading to. Sillin handed over the student ID Guanfeng had given him for inspection, and the door opened for Sillin and Huimao to enter. The interior of the building was a very simple metallic color. It wasn't too dazzling, but Sillin could sense that there were martial equipment embedded inside the walls, ready to deal with any intruders at any moment. There was a logo on every door, but it wasn't the logo of any of the 3 affiliated schools. It was the logo of the RES. This meant that the owner of this building was a member of the RES. An intelligent, mechanized building, powerful equipment, and sophisticated scanning system. This place isn't bad, Huimao commented. Sillin flicked the restless guy on his shoulder and took the elevator to a conference room on the 10th floor. He waved his student ID in front of the scanning hole, and the door of the conference room opened. The first thing he saw was a dozen or so people seated around the round table. Like Sillin, there were students from AF1 and AF2 who had been invited to attend the event. There were also people wearing the emblem of the RAS. Oh, you're here, Sillin. Come have a seat. You came just in time. We were just about to start. A member of the RAS said to Sillin with a smile. Sillin nodded politely and sat down on an empty chair. The person who was sleeping next to him rubbed his hair and glanced at Sillin, who sat down beside him. You're here too. The student who had just woken up was Wally, his roommate in the temporary dormitory. Wally was kicked over by the teacher, who was still righteous even though he was in debt to do some preschool training. Wally was very reluctant about it, and putting aside how lazy he was, Wally's goal for coming here was different from most people. He did not seek wealth and glory, only food and clothing, nor did he seek to accumulate battle achievements. All he wanted was a peaceful life. Even if he had to listen to those old pedants spitting spittle all over the place, talking passionately about things that most students found unfathomable, but couldn't understand with a glance, Wally did not want to run here and there. Not to mention he had to leave the academy to complete a dispatch mission. If it wasn't for the old man's generous salary, Wally wouldn't have moved a single step. He arrived rather early, but he didn't know anyone in the conference room. Most of them were former students. Other than listening to them show off their glorious deeds and gossip about the teachers and famous students of the affiliated schools, he could only listen to the academicians talking about the mysterious things they were talking about. In Wally's opinion, the teachers' gossip and the academicians' profound academic topics were all hypnotic. Wally didn't participate in the discussion when he heard that he had to wait for someone else. He lay down on the table and fell asleep. He didn't expect to see an acquaintance sitting next to him when he woke up. This was good news for Wally. If he didn't know anyone, he might have slept through the entire mission. Sillin was also happy to see Wally. "Yeah, it's a mission from my teacher. I didn't think I'd be assigned a mission before I even found my footing." Wally rubbed his face to wake himself up. The conference officially began after Sillin sat down. The organizer first explained the mission. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't complicated either. Everyone knew about it before they came. The organizer also introduced the students who were invited. Sillin had heard from Guanfeng about the secrets hidden in this mission before he came. Since this mission was initiated by the RES and not by any noble of the empire, the emperor, the three kings, or the two armies, all the invited students had one thing in common, and that was that their path of development hadn't been decided yet. They hadn't joined any force or noble yet. To put it nicely, it was because the RES valued these people and wanted to avoid arousing suspicion by not involving themselves with other forces. To put it bluntly, even if the invited students died a heroic death, the organizer wouldn't need to waste time explaining things to the various forces. Many of the invited students' teachers had direct connections with the RES, so the entire mission was an internal matter of the RES. They could resolve their internal conflicts themselves. There were 10 invited students, and they would be escorted by a few academicians and honorary scholars of the RES. As for the other guards, they weren't going to use the Imperial Army, but the RES' own guards. There weren't many of them, but they were strong. After all, many of them had stayed behind from the affiliated schools. After a brief introduction of the mission, the leader told everyone to get ready to depart. It looked like the RES was in a hurry for this mission. The RES's starship had a large RES emblem on it, and it enjoyed the same special flight routes and jump points as the nobles. It had to be said that the RES was rich. That much could be seen from the starship's internal configuration and decorations. The 10 students had an activity floor on the starship that belonged solely to them. The lounge for the 10 of them was also on this floor. At the entertainment area at the center of the floor, Sillin and Wally were sitting on armchairs and enjoying the fruit juices and snacks served to them by the robots. Alcohol was not allowed in this place, and it was said that there was an incident in the past where a student went crazy after drinking and caused huge losses. Therefore, if you were a heavy drinker but you didn't go crazy after drinking, you should show your instructor's certificate of approval, sign a letter of guarantee, and get the signature of the highest-ranking officer of the starship. Only then would you be allowed to drink. Although Sillin and Wally really wanted to drink, they found it more troublesome. They also had to endure the RAS's academicians and honorary scholars' scolding and health education. Alcohol has different effects on the central nervous system. It affects acetylcholine, neuropeptides, and corticotropin release factors too, blah 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 blah. To those academicians and honorary scholars who were used to thinking from an academic point of view, Wally wished he could take off his shoes and stuff them into their mouths. This was the common point of view shared by him and his extremely scoundrelly mentor, who was in debt as it should be. Not far away, Huimao was playing a game with York, a former cadet. Huimao, who had once been looked down upon by the Miantuan and put in a lot of effort in this area, was able to win 2 out of 3 games against York. York was quite dissatisfied with this result and kept dragging Huimao to the other side. That was why Sillin and Wally simply sat here and chatted as they watched. Sillin and Wally were chatting when a sweet voice interrupted them. "Your teacher Guanfeng's new student?" Sillin looked up. It was the girl named Kinasenza. She was a year older than Sillin and the others, and she had a gentle and pleasant appearance. Her long dress was very eye-catching among the 10. During the meeting, the organizer had introduced everyone's names, but didn't mention which teacher they belonged to. Sillin wasn't surprised that Kinasenza was able to tell the truth. After all, many former cadets knew that he had the Purgatory Thunder Snake K during the selection test. When he saw Kinasenza coming over, Wally winked at Sillin and moved his butt of his own accord to give up the seat next to him for Kinasenza. Kinasenza thanked Wally and sat down, staring at Sillin with wide, curious eyes. Sillin nodded in response to Kinasenza's question. Yes, my teacher is Guanfeng. Kinasenza was very happy to receive Sillin's confirmation. She turned around and shouted at the people sitting on the other side of the entertainment hall. Eros Vino Dadwa, he really is teacher Guanfeng's student. The 3 people sitting on the other side saw this and stood up to walk over. The big guy, Eros, looked a little embarrassed. After hearing Kinasenza's words, he scratched his head and said a little bashfully, "Oh, he." Vino and Dadwa looked at Sillin with probing and doubtful eyes. The others sitting in the other corner of the entertainment hall also looked over with a look of anticipation. In fact, the moment Sillin entered the meeting room, he knew that some of the people here were full of hostility towards him. They weren't looking at Sillin with jealousy, but they weren't friendly either. Guanfeng seemed to have known that this would happen, which was why he said those words to Sillin. Seeing that things didn't seem to be going as he imagined, Wally looked at Sillin and asked if he needed help. Sillin shook his head imperceptibly, indicating that he could handle it himself. This is Vino Dadwa, and the big guy Eros. As for me, do you know my name? Kinasenza asked Sillin with a smile. Her eyes were curved and shining. I've introduced you guys in the meeting before. I know you, Kinasenza, Sillin answered. Kinasenza waved a finger playfully. It's fate that we've gotten to know each other during this mission, so there's no need to be so distant. You guys can call me Kiki like Dadwa does. Dadwa was the only female among the 10 people here except for Kinasenza. The other 8 were all men. Dadwa's style was completely different from Kinasenza's. She was lively, active, and got along well with the others. She might look careless, but she had her own principles. This was what Sillin had learned over the past few days. Vino walked up to Sillin and looked down at Sillin from above. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down. He raised his chin and said, I know teacher Guanfeng. His Purgatory Thunder Snake is very famous. In other words, the reason I know you is because your teacher is Guanfeng, not because you're amazing. Many people in the affiliated school had heard of Guanfeng's fame and seen him before. After all, Guanfeng had taught some classes here before. Every time Guanfeng's classes had a limited number of slots, and every time, they were filled up almost instantly. The moment the class started, the students who had been waiting for a long time on the in-school platform would fight for the slots with all their might. This showed just how famous Guanfeng was. However, that was only on the surface. Sillin didn't mind Vino's words at all. He didn't refute them and he didn't say anything either. Vino and Dadwa exchanged a glance with each other when they saw that Sillin wasn't going to fight back. Then they smiled mockingly. I heard that all of teacher Guanfeng's students are very good at shooting. I agree with that. Although I haven't seen your 3+1 test with my own eyes, I've heard a bit about it from my senior brothers. However, Vino looked like he had seen through Qin Lai's intentions. He paused for a moment before continuing. I wonder if you people who play with guns are only suited to shooting from afar and not fighting at close range? Vino and Dadwa moved at the same time as soon as he finished speaking. Dadwa was undoubtedly very fast, and Vino was a little closer to Sillin. His desire to attack was so strong that people would unconsciously pay more attention to him if they were attacked at the same time. After all, Vino and Dadwa had been in the affiliated school for a longer time. Compared to the candidates who participated in the selection test a few days ago, Vino and Dadwa were undoubtedly more skillful. Their attacks were direct and swift. On one side was Kinasenza, on the other side of Sillin, and behind him was a chair. In any case, it was a difficult problem for a pure marksman to face such a pincer attack. However, Sillin wasn't a pure marksman. In fact, before Kinasenza arrived, Sillin had already noticed the probing gazes from Vino and the others. Sillin was wondering when they would make a move, but it turned out that Kenosenza, a girl who didn't have much combat power, was the first to draw Vino and Dadwa over. The two of them took the opportunity to get close to Sillin and attack him at close range. However, as soon as Vino and Dadwa started to move, they quickly stopped and stiffly stood in their original positions. Vino's fingers were in the shape of claws, and his target was Sillin's neck. Dadwa's fist was aimed at Sillin's waist, but because of Sillin's teleportation, they both deviated from the most suitable point of attack. Even so, they didn't have the intention to continue attacking. Apart from York, who was playing the game with Huimao, everyone else was looking at them with blank expressions. What was it that forced Vino and Dadwa to stop attacking? A knife and a gun. The thin long knife was pointed at Vino's eyebrows, and the Purgatory Thunder Snake K was pointed at Dadwa's head. The strange atmosphere in the surroundings affected York, who was playing the game with Huimao. He finally realized that the surroundings were a little too quiet, and he could only hear him and Huimao cursing each other in the game. York was distracted by the images around him, and Huimao decisively killed him with a single hit. Looking at the words that flashed on the screen, York was furious. He slammed the game table and roared, "Hey, what's wrong with you guys?" However, after seeing the situation on Sillin's side, York was stunned. He poked Huimao, who was licking his claws proudly because he had won the game, and pointed at Sillin. Huimao didn't even look at him. "Why do you care so much? No wonder you lost. This is called a lack of willpower." Bullshit. Again. York didn't care about the others' reactions. He flexed his fingers and continued playing with Huimao. Huimao was very happy because they had gambled, and they had won at least 3 bags of fish biscuits in the past few rounds. This was a good harvest. It was rare to meet an idiot like York. If York knew that he was an idiot in Huimao's eyes, how would he feel? Sillin held a sword and a pistol in one hand. No one could tell what he was thinking, but Vino and Dadwa were the ones who attacked first, so the others wouldn't blame Sillin. The problem was that the people watching from afar didn't have any intention of stopping the fight. If Sillin was an easy target, they might have tried to stop him because he was their senior, but now it seemed that Sillin wasn't. They weren't his senior, and their relationship with Vino and Dadwa wasn't very good either. No one wanted to get into trouble. Therefore, they didn't do anything after their initial shock. Eros scratched his head again and looked at Kenosenza, indicating for her to mediate. After all, Kenosenza was a girl, so she was better than a big guy like him. Eros might make the situation worse if he went into the fray directly. Plus, it was common knowledge that Eros wasn't very good with words. Wally crossed his legs and slowly picked up a snack with his fingers, putting it into his mouth, ignoring the pitiful look Kenosenza was giving him. Kenosenza put down the teacup in her hand and smiled. As expected of Guanfeng's student. "I'm impressed. It's just a small fight. Sillin, Vino and Dadwa are just curious about you. Let's leave it at that." Sillin looked at Kenosenza and smiled. Kenosenza didn't know what Sillin's smile meant, but she felt that Sillin's eyes seemed to be able to see through her. Sillin's hand shook, and the knife and gun disappeared. He picked up the cup and juice again. The people watching from afar said to their companions, "Is his teacher really Guanfeng? No wonder everyone fights to get a spot every time Guanfeng starts a class." Their companion nodded in agreement. As expected of a famous teacher. Look at how his student is this good even though he's just entered the school. No wonder Guanfeng accepted him. Although they worshipped Guanfeng in the past, it was mainly because of his Purgatory Thunder Snake. Boys tended to pay more attention to guns, and the mysterious Purgatory Thunder Snake was one of them. However, in their opinion, a melee fighter with a gun was nothing special. Today, however, Sillin had taught them a lesson, who said that melee combat couldn't be done with guns. Looking at his movements, they couldn't even keep up with him. In the blink of an eye, he was stopped by the long saber. Even Dadwa couldn't match his speed, right? Sillin and the others might not know Dadwa's identity right now, but the seniors did. Dadwa shared the same teacher as Biao, who was famous for his speed. This meant that Dadwa was also good at speed. However, even Dadwa couldn't get the upper hand against Sillin. They didn't know that even Dadwa's senior brother Biao had been kicked by Silin once, let alone Dadwa, who was slightly weaker than Biao. Vino stared at Silin for a while after Silin put away his knife. Then he smiled and said, "You're amazing. I admit defeat." Vino's words made Silin look at him in a higher light. A person who could admit defeat so calmly did leave a better impression on him. Dadwa flicked her fingers and casually collapsed on a nearby recliner. She put her feet on the edge of the table and said, "As I thought, I'm still not good enough. No wonder my teacher said I'm lacking. Sigh, I'm under a lot of pressure compared to a new student like you. I wonder what my senior brother Biao will do." Hui Mao tilted his ear to the side and said while moving his claws to control the game board, "Biao? You mean the guy with Panther the Black Panther?" Hui Mao's words startled York. His hands trembled. Damn it, he lost again. Hui Mao skillfully raised his claws and scooped up the gambling money on the side. He counted it and then pushed it under his feet. There was already a stack of coins on his butt. York didn't care about the money he lost and jumped in front of Hui Mao to ask, "You know Biao and Panther?" Hui Mao raised his eyes and looked at York, who was full of curiosity and astonishment. He raised his claws and moved them in front of York. Fuck. York rummaged in his pocket and took out a note with a large face value. He put it back and took out a smaller one and handed it to Hui Mao. Hui Mao looked at the note and then at York's pocket. He didn't take it and didn't say a word. Silin was focused on drinking his juice. Wally curled his lips. After spending time together in the temporary dormitory, he already knew that this master and servant duo weren't good people. York shook the coins and said, "Hey, don't overdo it. Leave some leeway." Umph. Hui Mao raised his claws and took the coins and put them under his butt. He said slowly, "I know Panther the Black Panther, and we know Biao too." Although Silin told them not to make it too public, it was still okay to say their names, right? Hui Mao counted with his claws. There's also Zani with wings, Puno the silly-looking big guy, Inaf, and the one playing the music. What's her name again? Olingshi. Now the few of them were really stunned, and became even more silent. Black Panther, Biao, Zani, Puno, and even Lingshi were acquainted with Silin. They were all characters who had been recruited by Wing in advance, and they could be considered celebrities in the affiliated schools. The people who could come into contact with them. Silin had thought that they were all people of the same level who had no sides, but he had never imagined that he would be able to come into contact with them. Wally didn't gossip often. Other than Zani, who appeared during the selection test, he didn't know the other people Hui Mao was talking about. However, from the reactions of others, he could tell the roles these people played in the affiliated school. At the same time, he also noticed that when Hui Mao mentioned these names, he was obviously more indifferent than usual, as if he didn't think much of these people. To be able to make Hui Mao react like this, this master and servant really hit it well. Hui Mao ran back to Silin with the money in his mouth and asked Silin to help him save the money, including the principal that Silin had lent him. Silin didn't bother to settle it with him. Hui Mao squatted on Silin's shoulder and looked at Eros, who was standing next to him, and said, "Puno is bigger than you." This was just a statement from the cat's mouth, and it didn't mean any disdain. It was just a statement of fact. Back then, when Puno swelled up and transformed, he had also seen it. Compared to Eros, he was indeed much larger. Ahihi. Eros scratched his head in embarrassment. Hui Mao. Don't mind him. Eros had always been like this. His catchphrase was ahihi ahahaohi. These 3 words were used according to the circumstances. To eliminate the awkwardness, Vino took the initiative to start a conversation and talked about Eros. Only now did they realize that Eros was actually Ironhead's senior brother. They were blood brothers, and they shared the same teacher. Finally, the awkwardness from before was eliminated. Wally also joined the conversation, and everyone got closer to each other. Silin wasn't a petty person. Just like Guanfeng said, it was inevitable that students would have some friction when they first met, but it would be fine after a fight. When they finally arrived at their destination, Silin, Vino, Dadwa, York, and Eros had become much more familiar with each other. However, York had suffered an even greater blow from Hui Mao. He wasn't good at games, and he still couldn't beat this fat cat in a fight. Every day, The cat's paw prints on York's face didn't disappear. Through this period of interaction, everyone knew that this fat cat was very familiar with the animals in AF1. It would be a lie to say that they weren't afraid. Everyone had some trauma from the selection test before they entered the school. After landing, Sillin noticed that the buildings on this planet weren't tall. There weren't any tall skyscrapers, but every building was like a fortress built for battle. Walking among these buildings gave people the illusion that they were on a battlefield. Rumor had it that wars did break out here, but not between humans, but between humans and beasts. The ocean took up 3/5 of the planet, and the remaining 2/5 was made up of land. However, almost half of the land was made up of desert and other areas. There weren't many people living here, so the land with better conditions had become densely populated. Before this mission, Sillin and the others had learned a bit about the general situation here. The conflict between humans and sea beasts, as well as the conflicts between humans. Cities were often attacked by sea beasts. Even if they had protective barriers, they wouldn't keep them up all the time. They didn't have enough energy resources to do so. Neither side was willing to give up their territory. Generations of struggle had become a habit. Humans' weapons were constantly upgrading, and marine species were constantly evolving. Maybe one day in the future, one side would finally win, and things would calm down for a while. If humans won, there would be even more intense internal conflicts after the peace. If the sea beasts won, the defeated humans might go down the road of destruction with their home, or they might leave this planet and find another to live on. However, they would always bear the mark of the defeated, and they would lose their home in the hands of the humans. The people here were very stubborn. This stubbornness was inherited from their ancestors. Otherwise, they wouldn't have stayed here to fight against the sea beasts by themselves. It was precisely because they realized the stubbornness of the people here that the RES sent someone to negotiate. If it were someone from other places who was easier to talk to, they could have settled the matter through long-distance communication. Why would they need to come all the way from the capital? Many houses had various kinds of dried fish hanging in front of them, so the air was full of similar smells. For example, the fat cat on Sillin's shoulder hadn't closed its mouth since it arrived. It was almost drooling. If it weren't for Sillin telling it not to run around, it would have run off to look for food as soon as it landed. Wow, look at the teeth of that fish. York pointed at half a fish head hanging in front of a house. Although it was only half a fish head, it was enough to tell them a lot. The fish head was about 2 meters long, and there were rows of sharp teeth in its mouth. Its pharyngeal teeth were also very sharp. Even if it escaped from its mouth, it would be crushed by the pharyngeal teeth. York's exclamation made the RES academicians feel very embarrassed. They glared at him, and York reluctantly retracted his finger that was about to personally feel the sharpness of the fish head's teeth. He winked at Vino and didn't say anything. The people from the RES had already informed the planetary government of this planet before they came here. The planetary government had also sent someone to welcome them, but it wasn't a warm welcome. Compared to the welcoming attitude they received on other planets, the RES could be said to have received a cold reception this time. The faces of two of the more arrogant academicians immediately darkened, but when they thought of the discussion they had before they left, they decided to put business first and endured it. Sillin's senses were very sharp. He could sense that there were people pointing guns at them from the surrounding buildings. It wasn't that they considered Sillin's group as enemies. They didn't have any killing intent, but it was just a habit. They were used to looking at people through the scope, and they were used to looking at people next to their guns. Perhaps this was the only way to make them feel safe, but they didn't have the slightest awareness of disrespect. They believed that the others could also sense that they were being pointed at by guns, but without any clear instructions, they just stayed on guard and didn't move. So this is what it feels like to walk under so many guns. Vino's lips twitched. The muscles on Arrow's face twitched, but he didn't reply. He didn't even use his usual 3-word reply, which showed how nervous he was. It didn't feel good to be pointed at by guns and not be able to do anything. However, Wally seemed to be very used to things like this. He wasn't as tense as Vino and York. Compared to the others, Wally and Sillin looked as casual as if they were taking a stroll on the streets. This made the others click their tongues in amazement. Maybe this is the difference? Dadwa thought. Other than Wally and Silin, there was another person who was also very relaxed, and that was Kinasenza. From their interactions over the past few days, Silin knew that although Kinasenza wasn't very strong, she had a natural ability to predict danger. Just like Tico's rabbit, she had a natural intuition for danger. Although those who knew Kinasenza's ability knew that she wouldn't be in danger, it was better to be safe than sorry. There was no backup for a life. If it was lost, it would be gone forever. So they would rather be more cautious than completely rely on Kinasenza. Suddenly, Kinasenza stopped in her tracks and frowned as she looked in a certain direction. Although Kinasenza had stopped, the entire team quickly went on high alert. "What's wrong, Coco?" an academician asked. Kinasenza shook her head. "It's nothing right now." In other words, there would be trouble later? Without the protection of the planetary government's army, the academicians didn't have much confidence in just their team. Although the human society on this planet was relatively peaceful, standing here for real, anyone would be afraid. They regretted not requesting for the Imperial Army to escort them. Huimao wagged his tail. He hoped that whatever happened would come fiercely. It wasn't easy to come here, so he had to play to his heart's content. As for what the others would do, it wasn't within Huimao's scope of consideration. He was a petty person and couldn't care less about so many people. The planetary government was indeed very grand, but like the other buildings in the city, it wasn't very tall. The first time Silin saw the planetary government, he felt that it was like a snapping turtle. It used a hard shell to protect itself, but it also opened its mouth and was ready to attack any incoming prey. There were layers of guards outside the planetary government, but only a small group was sent to pick them up. It was far inferior to the military personnel stationed here. "Silin, there's a big guy inside the planetary government." Huimao stared at a certain part of the planetary government with wide eyes. "Is it a sea beast?" Silin asked. "Yes, but that poor sea beast doesn't seem to be in good condition. It's being used for research." Huimao had always hated the word research. Back in the League of Stars, a lot of foreign animals were captured for research. That was why Huimao couldn't be too casual while he was there. But after coming to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, he felt a lot better. At the very least, the foreign animals here weren't openly captured for research. The animals in AF1 had their rights too. They provided their blood to the RES for research, but only on a voluntary basis. Not only that, they were also paid handsomely for their blood. Panther the Black Panther was even recruited into Wing. Although Huimao didn't have a high opinion of Panther, who had been defeated by him, Panther, as a member of Wing, would undoubtedly consider things from the perspective of the beasts in the future. He would protect the rights of more beasts, and prevent them from being ravaged by some crazy people. This was also the reason why Huimao still had a good impression of Pan, say even though he had defeated him. It was more convincing for the rights and interests of mutated animals to be protected by mutated animals. "It seems like the conflict between the humans and the sea monsters here is quite intense," Silin said. As soon as Silin's voice fell, a low roar rang out and traveled very far. "Deep sea beasts?" From the sound of this sea beast, Silin could tell that it was a species that lived in the deep ocean. It wasn't easy to bring a big guy from the deep sea here alive. Chapter 250. What kind of sound would you make if you were captured by the enemy and put on a laboratory bench for a series of experiments and other torture? Normally, many people would think that this sea beast was just making its last cry as a trapped beast, but that was not the case. Even the locals did not know much about deep-sea sea beasts. Just capturing this one had already cost them a lot of manpower and resources. They had specially built a data system for the sea beast, and the data system was constantly being upgraded and updated. But after fighting for so many years, although the people on the planet had a much better understanding of sea beasts, they still did not have a deep understanding of some key species. Huimao pulled back his ears and said to Silin, "Something's not right. This captured sea beast shouldn't be making a sound like this." Silin looked at Huimao. "Captured sea beasts don't live for long, do they? As far as I know, captured sea beasts will either commit suicide in despair, or be used as experimental subjects. Either way they won't live long, Vino said. We shook its whiskers. Judging from its voice, this sea beast doesn't have much longer to live. However, its cry just now wasn't filled with despair or sorrow like you said. It was filled with mockery and joy. Mocking and happy. The others looked at Huimao in surprise, waiting for Huimao's explanation. Yes, although I can't understand what it is trying to express, I feel that the cry just now was sarcastic, but also contained a sense of happiness. The cry of a sea beast at the end of its life is not a cry of sorrow, but a mocking one? Who is it mocking? The humans on the planet? Dadwa rubbed her chin in thought. York glanced at Kinasenza. Could this be the reason why Coco is feeling uneasy? If it's making such a cry, there must be a reason for it to do so. Kinasenza was deep in thought. She could only predict what would happen next based on her feelings, but she couldn't figure it out. Although she felt uneasy before, she couldn't tell why she felt uneasy. The leaders of the planet's government finally came out. The ruler of this planet was a small aristocrat. Although he was just a small aristocrat, he was quite stubborn and difficult to negotiate with. Sometimes, the lesser nobles were harder to deal with than the greater nobles. It was like the saying, the barefoot is not afraid of the barefoot. We are more than happy to welcome the people of the RAS. The Prime Minister and the minor nobles came out to greet them with smiles on their faces. But looking at their fake smiles, he knew that the so-called welcome actually meant the same thing as, "What are you doing here?" The RAS sent out negotiators, and both sides sat on one side of the conference room. Sillin and the others stood off to the side in a daze. There weren't many guards from the planetary government in the conference room. It was obvious that the planetary government knew what they were doing. They couldn't afford to offend the RAS too much. Otherwise, it would be a life-and-death struggle. The two parties had already discussed the matter of Sea Blue Gold before, but at that time, the planetary government's attitude was rather unyielding. However, now that the Royal Academy of Sciences had sent someone over to negotiate with them, they had also shown their sincerity. There was no deal that couldn't be made. The only thing they lacked was a bargaining chip. In order to make the Royal Academy of Sciences relent, the people from the RAS even brought along certificates, contracts, and academician badges. The planetary government was obviously shaken, but they still couldn't give a definite answer. As the owner of the planet, the minor nobles didn't allow the RAS to come into contact with the researchers who invented the aquamarine gold formula. They were probably afraid that the researchers would leave the planet if they were to poach them. However, on the other hand, if the planet could produce an RAS academician, it would undoubtedly be a great boon to the planet. The minor nobles had their own selfish motives. So although the negotiation was progressing, it was very slow. Sillin estimated that the negotiation might take some time. The minor nobles would only relent after they had figured out what the minor nobles wanted. Although the Royal Academy of Sciences was not very welcoming, the minor nobles had arranged for them to live in good conditions. The planetary government was located in the middle of the continental plate, which was also the furthest place from the coast. If the sea beasts could attack here, then the millennium-long struggle would finally come to an end. In the place that the minor nobles had arranged for them, the academicians and scholars of the RAS were discussing countermeasures. At the same time, they were also making academic comments on the situation of the planet. In a room separated by a wall, Sillin and a few other students were discussing. Hey, why don't the minor nobles directly reach an agreement with the RAS? It's obvious that the RAS is more anxious this time. This way, the minor nobles can reap more benefits. For example, they can further arm the land defense system of the city, the country, or even the entire planet. After all, the RAS's weapons research is very good. York leaned on the windowsill and crossed his legs. If an external force intervenes, it will be seen as a disguised invasion. After all, once the long-term balance is broken, no one knows what will happen next. Didn't something similar happen on a planet before? Internal strife, external help, and in the end, the external help benefited. The planetary government was reshuffled. Dadwa understood this. That's true. Vino nodded in agreement. The minor nobles are looking at us as if we're looking at a contradiction. We can only make him relent step by step. We can't force him to give in. Is it necessary to go this far just for a formula? Wally yawned and said lazily as he leaned on the table. That depends on who we're dealing with. This formula is crucial to a project of the RAS. Every minute the RAS's research project is delayed is equivalent to losing a lot of money, so we're in a hurry. Don't you see how anxious those old men are? A student beside him said. Dadwa looked at Kinasenza, who had been silent all this time. Kiki, tell us your opinion. Kinasenza shook her head. She was not in the mood to discuss this with everyone. She frowned and said, I have a feeling that something is going to happen. Tell everyone to pay attention today. There might be changes. Dadwa's heart skipped a beat. When Kinasenza said might, it meant that there was an 80% chance that something would happen. After Kinasenza said this, the rest of the people in the room stopped talking and began to adjust their state of mind to prepare for what might happen. Huimao, who was lying on the window sunbathing, twitched his nose and opened his eyes. He looked at the end of the street, then looked at the sky and grinned. It's coming. While Huimao was feeling happy, he was suddenly dragged into the room by Silin. What did you find? Silin asked. Didn't you notice? Huimao pointed outside the window. Silin pulled Huimao to the window in confusion. As he breathed, Silin finally understood what Huimao was referring to. The air humidity is increasing. Huimao wagged his tail up and down. His dilated pupils showed his excitement. Although it's not obvious right now, I'm sure it's related to those sea beasts. I can already smell the fishy smell of the sea on them. Not long after, there was a commotion around them. After all, they were people who had been fighting against sea beasts for a long time. They reacted quickly to the possibility of the change in the environment. The air humidity display was a must-have for every household on the planet. Children would speculate about certain things based on the fluctuations in the humidity display. It was as common as eating a meal. York turned on his microcomputer and began to hack into the planet's network. Many news were blocked by the planet's government here, and they would not tell the people of the RAS what was happening. Of course, the things that were happening right now were extremely common to the people living on the planet. Since it was common, why would they tell outsiders like them? After hacking into the network, the image that popped up on the microcomputer was shocking. The coastal defense line has been shrouded in thick fog, and the fog is spreading inland at an extremely fast speed. Sea fog. Dadwa looked at the analysis data and moved closer, as if to confirm the authenticity of the data. This data was analyzed by local researchers. They're all professionals, so it's very reliable, York said. Silin glanced around. Huimao was squatting on the windowsill and looking into the distance, shaking its head and humming a little tune. The happier the cat was, the more it proved that those things were getting closer. Some of the buildings around them had already closed the windows and other relatively large openings. The buildings that originally looked like fortresses now looked even more solemn and strict. The people in the buildings had already begun to adjust their weapons. They were prepared whether they would be used or not. Silin and the others had only seen some short battle scenes. These scenes did not represent the entire battle. The footage was too limited, and many of the sea beasts only showed a little bit of their bodies. It's fog, Silin said. The light in the sky had already begun to blur. They could feel the water vapor drifting in the breeze. Let's close the windows too. There are hallucinogenic factors in the fog. Hearing Silin's words, two of the academies even took out their detectors suspiciously and checked at the window. It was just as Silin said. Even if the amount of hallucinogenic factor was not enough to affect them right now, it was hard to say when the fog thickened. Moreover, it would be difficult to remedy the situation once the amount of hallucinogenic factor was reached. Several academicians had already sent people to guard them. They were only separated by a wall, so if anything happened, they would be able to protect them in time. After closing the windows and turning on the airflow balance system, everyone looked at the image that popped up on the microcomputer. Since it could affect the central area, it was obvious that the battle this time was quite large. We can also see the famous battle between humans and beasts. We can see how strong the manpower and military force of this planet is, a student said. Some people were looking forward to it, some were nervous, but Huimao was very unhappy. He was circling around the window. The plan to go out and catch fish was killed. What the fuck? This time, the sea fog had spread over a wider area. From the image sent by the satellite, the entire continent had been covered by a third of the fog, and it was starting from the edge. The fog was very thick, and the fog covered a large area. No one knew how long the fog would last. In the areas with very low visibility, the border guards were already fully armed. If they breathed in such a thick fog without a mask, they would collapse in less than 5 seconds. The fog in the coastal area was already very thick. Ordinary cameras could only capture a blue color. Blue. Yes, blue. If the color was any darker, it would definitely be the same color as the ocean. When they first arrived on this planet, Sillin noticed that the color of the ocean on this planet was different from the other planets. That kind of blue made people feel a little cold. It's not just the sea fog. Some of the islands around the continent and the low-altitude areas near the coast have already been submerged by the sea. York brought up the terrain map. The strange thing is that the ocean is still very calm. Before York could finish his sentence, an image silenced him. This was the image that appeared in the sky above a certain distance from the coastal area. In the background of the spreading blue fog, a rather hazy shadow of a giant beast as tall as a skyscraper suddenly appeared. As it moved, the thorns on its body could be vaguely seen. If not for the fact that the city below was still intact, it would have looked like a giant beast trampling over the city. A projection? Something like a mirage? I'm not sure. Since the shadow has appeared, does it mean that the big guy has already appeared somewhere? York brought up another document and showed it to everyone. What is this? Vino and the others felt dizzy just looking at it. Let's let the academicians of the RES look at this. But will those stubborn old fellows criticize our intrusion? Sillin pursed his lips. Even if they criticize us verbally, they still agree with York's actions. Otherwise, why would they bring York along? York's network intrusion skills were very strong. This was much more outstanding than his combat strength. Since he was brought along for this mission, there must be a similar intention. However, the old fellows of the RAS were too proud to say it out loud. All right then, I'll send it to them directly. 2 minutes later, an honorary scholar from the Royal Academy of Sciences came in. Seeing the innocent look on York's face, he sighed and said, "Let me tell you something." The academicians all went to study the documents that York sent over. Then they brought him over to talk to York and the other students about how to tactfully guide the network invasion. Although Sillin listened to the speech of the honorary scholar like everyone else, his mind was already thinking about something else. He also asked Huimao to hack into the planet's network to dig up some information. The document that York had just found was a research report. The subject of the research was a type of deep-sea giant beast that was called a sea king by the researchers. Every battle was led by these sea kings. From the looks of it, it was quite similar to the black shadow in the fog that they had seen before. From the research report, humans had only caught one sea king in the past 100 years. However, the sea king died not long after it was caught. This research report was published that year. The voice that Sillin and the others heard from the planetary government wasn't the voice of a sea king. It was a species that was even lower in rank than the sea king in the ocean pyramid. The sea king was a deep-sea giant beast with a layer of skin that could exchange ions. They could absorb certain metal elements in the seawater to achieve the purpose of camouflaging these sea monsters. With this layer of functional skin, even if they swam close to the surface of the sea, they would not be discovered by the detectors. As long as they didn't show their heads, most of the time, they could avoid being detected by the scanners. Therefore, for a period of time, humans suffered a lot. Apart from the functional skin that the sea king sea monsters possessed during their evolution, their voices were also very special. The sea king would emit a pulse sound wave to affect or intercept torpedoes or missiles that were fired at it. The special structure in the sea king's throat was like a sound wave converter. It could emit a high-energy pulse sound wave in an instant. It was strong enough to destroy or detonate a torpedo or missile that had been locked onto. The Sea King's super-strong directional pulse sound wave caused a lot of trouble for humans. At least, that was the case during the years when this research report was published. According to some of the documents, every time the Sea King came out, some small characters in the shallow waters or the ocean would all escape to make way for the Sea King. This was because the powerful sound waves produced by the various sonars created by the Sea King could cause the small characters to die. From a certain point of view, the Sea King can also emit sound waves similar to infrasound? Vino asked. The honorary scholar nodded. You can say that. Infrasound's ability to cause interference was very strong. It could penetrate and reach very far away. Every time the Sea King roared, many cities could hear it. This showed how far it could travel. Just as the honorary scholar was explaining to them, Huimao jumped onto Silen's shoulder. Found it. It really has something to do with the sea blue gold. When he saw the functional skin on the Sea King, mentioned in the document, Silen suspected that the sea blue gold formula had something to do with the functional skin of the Sea King. Therefore, he asked Huimao to hack into the network system to check. The results were just as Silen expected. However, the research team of the minor noble only obtained a part of the Sea King's tail. They are trying to obtain the functional skin on other parts of the Sea King. Different parts have different metal ratios. At least for now, the functional skin on the Sea King's tail and claws have different metal ratios. In other words, if Silen and the others could obtain the analysis data of the functional skin on other parts of the Sea King, it would be equivalent to obtaining different upgraded versions of the sea blue gold. In that case, why would they still need to negotiate with the minor noble? Silen. Huimao moved his claws and chuckled. Why don't I get some for you? Chapter 251. Are you sure? Silen asked. Honestly speaking, Wheeze was the best choice for Silen to collect the samples. Silen couldn't leave right now, so it was better for them to collect the samples in secret. Moreover, Guanfeng had told him that strategy was everything in the RAS. There was no such thing as a pure land. Of course, it would be a good idea to ask the fat cat to collect a sample from the Sea King. However, Silen didn't have an accurate estimate of the Sea King's strength, and it was still up for debate whether the fat cat could safely obtain a sample from the Sea King. Huimao was about to explode when he heard Silen's doubtful question. What can those fish do to me? Silen thinks for a moment and smiled. Yes, at least his life wouldn't be in danger, even if he couldn't get a sample from the Sea King. Silen almost forgot that the cat wasn't a pure animal. It was a machine. Do what you can, Silen emphasized. Huimao flicked its ears and replied impatiently, got it. Then, it jumped out of the window Silen had opened. Silen, why are you snoring at a time like this? Dadwa asked in surprise when she saw Huimao jump out of the window. That guy is going out for a walk. It says it's bored here. Let's not talk about it. I'm bored here myself. Wally lay down on the table lazily. Although there was a life support system inside the room to balance things out, perhaps because of the architectural style, they were not used to staying in this kind of environment. It always made them feel stuffy inside. Sea beasts had already landed on the coast, and the battle between the border guards and the sea beasts had already begun. However, they couldn't hear the sound of gunfire because they were too far away. Still, they could tell just how intense the battle was from the blurry images on the internet. Thick blue mist enveloped the city, blocking the sky and some of the surveillance devices. This kind of fog was different from ordinary fog. There were some metal ions and other influencing factors in the fog. They could interfere with the detection system, so they could only know the situation of the area around each scanner. At times like this, the demand for scanning detectors would increase greatly. The people on the planet were already used to fighting in the sea fog. Even if they hadn't developed a transmission detector for this kind of sea fog, they could still quickly respond to the situation on the battlefield. A few people followed the honorary scholar to the room next door where Huangjie and the Academy of Sciences were staying. Now, only a few people were left in the room that Silen was familiar with. York continued to hack into the various networks on the planet to understand the situation of the battle in the area under his eyes. He showed everyone the images captured by some of the local scanners. Actually, the Royal Academy of Sciences has developed a scanner with a stronger transmission ability. Even this special sea fog should be more useful than the one here. Do you think the people from the Royal Academy of Sciences will provide some equipment to soften up that minor noble? I don't think so. Vino sneered. Let's not talk about whether that minor noble appreciates their help or not. Just look at those old geezers from the Royal Academy of Sciences. Do you really think those old geezers can be compassionate? They can't wait for the war on the planet to get more intense, so that the sea beasts can attack faster. That way, the minor noble's government will suffer a setback and come over to ask for reinforcements. That way, both sides will be able to trade faster, and the old geezers from the Royal Academy of Sciences will be able to flatter themselves. Indeed. If possible, those old geezers might even give them a hand in the dark. Dadwa agreed. At this rate, how long will this battle last? York asked as he pointed at the images on the screen. In the images, the tremors of the cannons and the roars of the sea beasts were mixed together. It was a strange scene under the blue mist. When the mist dissipates, the sea beasts will naturally return to the sea. That's what I heard from the people outside, Kenasenza, who had just gone out, said. Kenasenza, who had just gone out, said, but I have a feeling that this fog is not normal. What do the locals say? Sillin asked. Kenasenza shook her head. They think it's normal. This time the fog is a little thicker. Almost the entire continent is covered in a layer of mist. The central area is a little better, not as bad as the coastal areas. However, the residents here say that a fog of this scale will appear once every 20 to 30 years, or even once every 70 to 80 years. Every time it appears, the coastal areas will be severely damaged by the sea beasts. The border defense lines will have to be rebuilt after the war. It's a waste of manpower and money. Sillin sat in his chair and did not say anything. He had a feeling that something was wrong. The fog was still as thick as ever after 2 days, but the central area of the continent was showing signs of weakening. This was undoubtedly good news for the people of the continent. It also boosted the confidence of the border guards. They would take out as many sea beasts as they could before the fog dispersed and the sea beasts retreated. Now that the situation was like this, many places in the central area had relaxed their guard levels. The place where Sillin and the others were staying was very obvious. Although the air vents on the buildings were still turned off, the people inside the buildings were a lot more relaxed than before. Some of the local soldiers would even joke around sometimes, but the people of the RAS were all frowning. For the past 2 days, the minor nobles and the planetary government seemed to have completely forgotten about them. They only sent soldiers to guard the place for protection and surveillance. Now that the battle had calmed down, Sillin and the others felt a little more at ease as well. Their rooms were surrounded by the people from the RAS, so they decided to stay in their rooms and sleep whenever they had nothing to do. They would know what was going on very soon anyway. Sillin brought it into his room, and the images on the microcomputer swiftly changed as his fingers moved. What would York think if he knew that Sillin was hacking into the planetary network with such familiarity? Everyone's jaws would probably drop to the ground in shock, wouldn't they? After all, their understanding of Sillin was limited to the fact that he was Guanfeng's disciple, and that he was quite strong. Sillin observed the coastal areas of the continent for a while before hacking into the border guard's internal network and obtaining a report. The report recorded the detailed situation of the defensive battle this time. The sea beasts of all levels were recorded, how many appeared, how many were killed, and the damage to the local cities. However, Sillin fell into deep thought when he saw a red dot on the map. These red dots were the places where the Sea King level sea beasts appeared. According to the report, the Sea King level sea beasts had moved closer to the mainland and destroyed several layers of the border defense line, compared to the last time the Sea King level sea beasts appeared on a large scale. I still feel like something's wrong. What is it? Sillin heard the Sea King's roar in one of the videos. Even though it was only an audio transmission, it was enough to make one's heart jump, let alone the border guards who were fighting against the sea beasts. The blue fog blocked the view, so he could only get a general idea of the human side's losses. How many warships and armored tanks were destroyed, how many fighters and aircrafts were lost, that was all. The thick fog blocked the terrible battle scene, and it was only after the fog cleared that it would reveal the fierce battle situation. Sillin tapped his fingers on the table. Sillin was familiar with the coastal defense line, the fortress-like buildings, and the weapons inside. However, logically speaking, the Sea Kings shouldn't have been able to penetrate so deep into the city in just 2 days. Were the Sea Kings really that powerful? Huimao jumped into Silen's room while he was thinking. Judging from its raised tail, things seemed to be going well. Are you full? Silen asked. Yes. Huimao was in a good mood. He squinted his eyes and said. Huimao jumped onto the table in front of Silen and spat out a palm-sized dark blue object. What is this? Silen looked at Huimao. This was Silen's room. There was only Silen and Huimao here. There was no one else, so Huimao didn't beat around the bush. I'm not sure. It should be the functional skin you guys are talking about, right? I took a bite on that big guy. Its skin is quite thick, and the outer layer doesn't have ion exchange properties. That's why I bit a little deeper. See if it's the functional skin, Huimao said. Silen only needed to touch the piece of skin that Huimao brought over with his hand to get the information he wanted. It's indeed a functional skin. There is a special exchange layer in the middle, which can absorb metal ions. But is that all you got this time? Huimao wagged his tail proudly and opened his mouth to the size of a water tank. He spat out pieces of dark blue skin one after another. Each piece could be used as a mattress. I bit all parts of that guy's body, but I didn't know which piece belongs to which part. You can do it yourself. Did you eat a Sea King beast? Silen asked suspiciously. Huimao smacked his lips and said, I didn't eat one, but it was not Ludus' hands. I was afraid that the human army would find it strange if I attacked a Sea King beast on the land, so I went into the sea to catch one. I didn't finish it, so I ate the delicious parts. Those guys were crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The skin was delicious, but the meat inside was not so good. The burnt skin was better. Celine nodded. As expected, this guy could eat anything, and he even had a stomach whose limits were unknown. Huimao spat out several pieces of Sea King beast skin. Silen also analyzed them one by one. In such a short time, Silen had gotten a lot of useful data, which might even be more than the data of Sea King beasts in the hands of the nobles. Sea King beasts rarely appeared on the mainland. Few Sea King beasts were caught by human beings. Even if they were caught, they would die by self-destruction. At that time, the samples of Sea King beasts would not be of much value. In contrast, the samples that Huimao gave to Silen were fresh, and the value of the data was much higher than that of those Sea King beasts that were dying. Suddenly, Silen noticed that Huimao's face twisted. What's wrong? Silen asked. No, nothing. Wow. Huimao spat out an egg that was half the size of a human. There was a layer of dark blue keratin on the egg. Compared to normal eggs, the surface of this egg was not smooth. After spitting out the egg, Huimao looked better. He licked his paws and said, It's nothing. I just ate too much. Silen. After picking up Huimao and making sure that Huimao was fine, Silen said, Don't eat if you can't eat. Why did you eat so much? I can still eat, but these eggs are not easy to digest. I ate too many this time. I'll spit this egg out first. I'll eat it when I'm hungry, Huimao said casually. Silen. However, Silen did not continue to worry about Huimao's appetite. He looked around the egg and put his finger on it to feel the information it contained. Hey, it's still alive, Silen exclaimed. Of course, I won't eat those rotten eggs. Huimao continued to lick his paws. In other words, the one you caught was a female. Silen paused for a moment. No, they're hermaphrodites. You killed a pregnant Sea King. Wheeze's licking slowed down a little when he mentioned this. I noticed something when I was dealing with the Sea King. What is it? The eggs were wrapped at the base of the tail. There was a very thick protective layer covering the eggs. However, when I fished out the eggs and ate them, I realized that the size and shape of the eggs were different. Even the genetic material was different. They were completely different species. From the layer of material covering the eggs, they looked similar. However, after biting a few, I realized that they belonged to different species. Huimao transferred the information to Silen's microcomputer for Silen to analyze. If the egg was crushed, it would be digested quickly. It was better to keep the egg whole for a longer period of time. Silen was puzzled as he stared at the information and the genetic data inside the eggs Whis had bitten into pieces. It's a sea king. Why would it steal the eggs of other species? I don't know about that. Wait, Huimao stopped licking his paws. His body trembled. What are you doing? Sillin asked. I crushed another 2 eggs that didn't have time to digest. Sillin. He did not expect that. Huimao transferred the information to Sillin's microcomputer. This time, one of the eggs was related to the sea king that Huimao killed. However, the other one was not. It belonged to another species. It was different from the 2 species that Huimao had given to Sillin. That's strange. Sillin looked at the microcomputer and pondered. Huimao ignored him. He looked at the egg that was spat out, and was about to swallow it. However, Sillin stopped him. Keep this first. Once he finished speaking, Celine took out a big box and put the egg inside. All right. Huimao did not mind. He was not hungry anyway. Eating too much would be a waste of nutrients. He licked his fur and jumped onto Sillin's shoulder to sleep. Sleep after eating. That was the truth. Sillin thinks that after a long time, he still could not figure out what was going on. He stopped thinking about it and started searching for information on the internet. In the process of searching, Sillin sneaked into many research institutes on different planets. Although he obtained a lot of information, most of it could not solve Sillin's doubts. However, when Sillin was sweeping through the network of the coastal war zone, an inconspicuous corner attracted Sillin's attention. That place was also under the attack of the sea beasts. The battle was also very intense. However, in this small corner there were no scanners, no military communication, no tactical discussions, and no exotic beast roars. Although the battle had stopped a little, it should still be a scene of devastation. It was impossible for the residents to stay there and be in the mood to go online, right? Sillin hacked in to take a look. Because of the war, the conditions there were limited. He could not get the images and audio for the time being. He could only know what the owner of the microcomputer was recording. The documents that popped up made Sillin's eyes light up. They were all about the Sea King beasts, and the analysis was much more thorough than the research groups under the minor nobles. Sillin read through the man's old records and learned that there was a time when sea beasts tried to sneak into the mainland through underground tunnels. Their movements were too loud, and they were discovered very quickly. Digging a tunnel from the ocean was definitely a thankless task, and there were plenty of sea beasts that were killed immediately after they were discovered. That was why the sea beasts no longer attempted such a thing after that. Then there was a document that recorded the changes in the number of Sea King beasts in the past 500 years. It also pointed out the most important point: no Sea King cub was found. In the war between humans and beasts 1,000 years ago, even if the Sea King cub did not follow the humans to attack the land, it would still appear on the sea surface. In the Misty area, people had once found a Sea King cub emerging. However, in recent years, no Sea King cub had been found. The minor nobles and his ruling government attributed this to the results of the war. After the war, the sea beasts were greatly weakened. For the Sea King beasts, their birth rate, which was not high to begin with, was even lower. Some of the research groups under the minor nobles even said that the sea beasts had fallen into a dead end. Without the replenishment of new blood, the Sea King beasts would one day become extinct on this planet. At that time, the report received a lot of support, and it also aroused the response of the people of the entire planet. People were very happy and looked forward to the end of the Sea King beasts. However, this person expressed doubts. Although there was no clear evidence, he analyzed many signs, and even analyzed the character of the Sea King beasts. The character of the Sea King beasts? What kind of character did these sea beasts have? At that time, after this person put forward his views, the academic circle of the planet had already opposed it, especially the suppression of the minor nobles' research groups. This person's words would undoubtedly affect the good image that the minor nobles had just created. One could imagine the situation this person was in. If this person was not lucky and always active in the coastal area, he might have been killed long ago. Sillin agreed with this person in a certain aspect. Did the sea beasts not have character? Did the sea beasts not have strict thinking and high intelligence? It was hard to say. Sillin thinks back to the rat extermination mission he participated in at Seven Lights. Those black mice had set up a great conspiracy. Then, what kind of conspiracy did these sea beasts have? Chapter 252. Right now, inside a certain building in the coastal city area, a man with white hair and a thin face was busily working in front of his equipment. He was analyzing every piece of data and running probabilities. It was obvious that this man had gone through rigorous calculations before making any predictions. However, this busy man didn't know that someone in the central continent was watching his calculations and speculations. Every step of his calculations and conclusions was clearly known to the person in front of the central continent's microcomputer. Sillin looked at the map of the main combatants in the coastal city area. Most of the places were where the Sea Kings were. Fortunately, the place where this man was doing statistical analysis had just escaped a disaster, so he wouldn't be in danger for the time being. He wouldn't know if this went on for too long, though. After all, the sea beasts would have to return once the fog cleared, and the damage they'd wreak on the city could be seen from the images of previous battles. Sillin felt that this man would be of great help. Even if some of the data wasn't accurate, the general line of analysis was extremely reliable. At the very least, he was much more trustworthy than the small nobles research group. After thinking for a moment, Sillin sent over 2 copies of the skin data he'd just obtained. Stappen, who was busy with his work, was startled by the 2 data tables that suddenly popped up on his screen. However, his attention was immediately attracted by the 2 tables, and he immediately deleted the few conclusions he'd reached earlier like he'd been injected with chicken blood. Then he substituted the data in the 2 tables Sillin had sent him and performed a precise analysis. However, Stappen also ran into a problem when he was substituting the new data. He was stuck in deep thought, and Sillin helped him solve the problem. Just like that, 2 people from different parts of the continent were working together through this network. Sillin had already disguised himself, so even if someone like York who had hacked into the network to steal information, he wouldn't be able to discover that Sillin and Stappen were working together. Right now, Stappen was extremely excited. He'd been fighting and persevering alone for so many years. The rejection, and oppression he'd suffered for the past few decades had left him depressed, but he'd persisted because of the last bit of determination he had for his home. Sillin's help was undoubtedly a shot in the arm that filled Stappen with motivation. On this planet, he was not alone in this battle. Stappen didn't care about the background of this mysterious and unknown person, nor did he care how this person obtained the precise information about these Sea Kings. All he knew was that this information would be a great boost to his analysis. Through Sillin and Stappen's collaborative analysis, they came to a few conclusions. First, it was impossible for a tyrant of the sea like the Sea King to experience reproductive failure. Therefore, it was absolutely wrong to say that the Sea King couldn't reproduce. Second, based on the case studies Stappen had collected in his analysis of the Sea King's living habits, this big guy had both brains and brawn, and wasn't an idiot who only knew how to charge forward blindly. Third, Stappen had come up with a probability graph for the answer. Since they were the kings of the sea, they naturally had to think much further than the other sea beasts. They considered the future of a large race and saw long-term goals. That was why they were qualified to be called kings. Who are you? Stappen keyed in these words on the screen. Right now they could only converse through text. Stappen's current condition didn't allow him to transmit audio or video at all, and some of the equipment on the battlefield was too damaged. Also, wouldn't it be a lot safer if it was just text? Audio and video were too easy to discover. Sillin stared at the line of words that appeared on the microcomputer's screen. He moved his fingers and typed a few words. Is it important? Stappen also knew that his network had been hacked, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he sent it with the intention of making friends. He was grateful to the person who had lent him a helping hand. Since the other party wasn't willing to reveal anything, Stappen didn't force the issue. He thought that the other party must be afraid of being discovered by that noble. If they were discovered, both of them would suffer greatly, and even their lives would be in question. Under Sillin's cover, Stappen anonymously sent the conclusion of his analysis to the planetary government. However, the planetary government flew into a rage when they saw it. Someone actually dared to make a statement that would destroy the peace of the planet. What impudence! If the public were to learn of the views expressed in this document, there was no telling how much panic it would cause. Therefore, the planetary government suppressed it immediately. Even when they tried to trace the source of this electronic document, they couldn't find anything. The planetary government's reaction was undoubtedly a heavy blow to Stappen. As expected, they still didn't believe him. Since they didn't believe him, Stappen decided to search for the answer himself. He wasn't a person who could think deeply, and he wasn't a person who was good at figuring things out. Therefore, all of his analysis conclusions were based on calculations. According to probability analysis, the conclusion he was looking for was somewhere along the coast. The planetary government doesn't believe me. I'm going to search for the answer. If I don't return, I hope that you can send me this incomplete analysis. This is my final request. Stappen typed this line on the screen. He knew that the other party had the ability to hide. This was also his last hope. After typing this line, Stappen packed up his tools and prepared to search for the answer in the calculated area. Sillin frowned as he stared at the words on the screen. He could imagine that the person on the other side was just as weak as the RAS academicians. People like that would be cannon fodder among cannon fodder if they went to the battlefield. They would either be trampled by sea beasts or blasted to smithereens by indiscriminate cannon fire. How the hell was he supposed to find the answer then? Sometimes, some researchers would always search for the answer hidden in the depths of danger with passion. Even if they were covered in wounds and beyond redemption, they would still charge forward with a single-minded mind. It wasn't for themselves, it wasn't for the ruler, it was for this place they called home. They were as stubborn as an idiot who still held the innocence of a child in the midst of thorns and thorns. In today's world where even the academic world had been polluted, there weren't many idiots like this anymore. From the information stored in Stappen's microbrain, Sillin learned that the so-called new sea blue gold formula wasn't actually invented by the minor nobles' subordinates. It was Stappen. Stappen used to be a member of the minor nobles' research team, but he was kicked out because he disagreed with the higher-ups. However, there were still people who believed in Stappen's abilities. Otherwise, how could Stappen have obtained other information about the Sea King? This was a trade. Although many people knew that Stappen had been kicked out of the research team a long time ago, the person in charge of the research team had always maintained contact with Stappen. This person didn't have much research ability, but he had a sharp nose for politics, which was why he was able to climb to such a high position. In this world, there would never be a lack of laymen leading professionals. Sillin had met the person who had always maintained secret contact with Stappen before. That person's position was also climbing higher and higher. Sillin had heard that this person's research results were numerous and impressive. Now it seemed that all of those results were stolen from Stappen. This person had used Stappen's idiotic stubbornness in exchange for his own fame, power, and wealth. Not only did he steal Stappen's research results, he also attacked Stappen's views and suppressed them. And so one climbed higher and higher, while the other fell further and further. Where are we going? Huimao asked when he saw that Sillin had put away the microbrain and was about to go on a long journey. I'm going to find the answer. Don't you want to see what those sea kings are plotting? Huimao flicked its tail. It was obviously not in the mood to do so. It had just eaten its fill and wasn't in the mood to do so. That being said, it didn't want to stay here alone to incubate its eggs after seeing that Sillin had left. Sillin left after saying goodbye to the person in charge of the RAS. Guanfeng must have mentioned this to the person in charge before, so the person in charge quickly agreed to Sillin's request. There were others who wanted to leave as well, but they were all turned down without hesitation. This was the difference between different mentors. What Sillin took out was a hoverboard he had borrowed from Guanfeng. The front end of the hoverboard was equipped with a space-braking device that increased the hoverboard's speed by a lot. It wasn't a good idea to fly at this speed through the fog when the scanning equipment wasn't working, but that was only true for other people. Sillin had the best navigation device in the world, the Grey Cat. This cat was much more useful than other devices, and it had all the necessary functions. The fog grew thicker and thicker as they flew from the central region to the coast. Although Sillin could withstand the toxins in the fog, he put on a protective mask so that he wouldn't look like an outsider. Right now, everyone was on guard against sea beasts, so they didn't pay too much attention to humans flying in the sky even if they were detected by the scanning equipment. As they approached the war zone, the security in the sky grew noticeably tighter. Although they were fighting against sea beasts, it wasn't like there were no sea beasts that could fly back. Therefore, they had to keep a tight watch on the sky as well. Huimao activated the scanning equipment of the defense forces, but they couldn't detect them. Right now, Sillin was flying toward the close combat zone under the cover of the blue fog. He could hear the roars of sea beasts amidst the sound of cannon fire, but he didn't see a sea king. This wasn't the war zone yet. The sea beasts that were crawling on the residential buildings were killed by the local residents who hadn't evacuated yet. Red and blue blood could be seen everywhere. On the ground, on the buildings, on the bodies of sea beasts and humans, on the fighter jets and armored vehicles. There was red blood of humans and blue blood of sea beasts. Yes, the blood of the sea beasts here was slightly blue. Although there were different shades of blue, blue was the main color. Sillin pulled the hoverboard upward. This wasn't his destination, so there was no need to waste time here. The sea beasts that had been flying happened to be flying toward Sillin. Although they weren't pure flying birds and could only fly at low altitudes for a short period of time, their attack power was not to be underestimated. Sillin cut the sea beast in half with one slash, but the hoverboard didn't slow down at all. As he flew higher, the number of flying sea beasts he encountered was much better. He wouldn't encounter a single one for a long time. After passing through this area, Sillin heard a roar coming from afar. He knew that he had arrived at the war zone. The war zone was much more intense. There were sea beasts everywhere, and there were many large fortress-like buildings equipped with countless cannons and gun barrels. The guards rarely used stimulation-type weapons, but if they did, they had to kill in one shot. Moreover, they had to constantly change their location because the stimulation-type weapons would attract the sea beasts and expose themselves. When Sillin was flying close to the surface, he saw a type of sea beast with a big mouth. They were able to resist the high-voltage electricity released by an armored car, and their thick bony skin was able to resist the cleavers and pincers on the armored car. Moreover, they were smart enough to stick themselves in places where the cannons couldn't reach, and their sharp teeth could leave scratches on the armored car. If an armored car encountered such a sea beast and couldn't escape within a minute, then the armored car would be scrapped, and the people inside would die for sure. The armored vehicle that Sillin encountered was undoubtedly in trouble. Two sea beasts with big mouths blocked the armored vehicle, one in front and one in the back. The sharp teeth in their big mouths scraped off the thick deck layer by layer. As Sillin flew past the armored vehicle, he slashed at the two sea beasts that were blocking the armored vehicle. After he was done, Sillin looked at the blade in his hand and noticed that there wasn't a single trace of blood on it. His blade had sliced through the big-mouthed sea monster's skin and bones, and the cleaver on the armored car looked like a pile of shit compared to it. The longer he used this blade, the more curious Sillin became. How did Esquello get his hands on a blade like this? After the armored vehicle was freed from the obstruction of the sea beasts, it quickly adjusted its cannons so that the sea beasts behind it couldn't find an opening to evade the cannons in a short period of time. The few sea beasts that were running toward them were killed. "I think someone just flew past us," a soldier said. "Fuck, who cares? Just focus on fighting the sea beasts," another person shouted. The closer they got to the sea kings, the more large sea beasts Sillin could see. The armored vehicles here were also stronger. It was like a game between giants. The sea beasts didn't even flinch under the continuous bombardment of the giant armored vehicles and flying warships. No one would notice that there was a tiny human flying in the middle of the battlefield. There were a few times when Sillin was almost hit by the indiscriminate bombardment. Still nothing. Sillin asked Huimao. "Nope." Huimao shook his head. The reason they were flying close to the ground was so that Huimao could better search for answers. From here onward, they would be in the area with the highest probability of an answer, as Stappen had mentioned. However, the probability of an answer in this area was relatively low. Forget it then. Let's keep flying. Sillin adjusted the hoverboard and pulled it higher. This area of the battlefield was too intense. It was the most important area of the current timeline, and it was also the area where the Sea Kings resided. The areas closer to the sea were already in ruins after the battle, so it wasn't as intense as this area. However, it was the area with the highest probability of an answer, as Stappen had mentioned. After flying past the most important area of the battlefield, Sillin saw cities that had been trampled by sea beasts and collapsed defensive lines. Of course, something like this would always happen in every major battle, and these defensive lines would be rebuilt after the battle. Huimao twitched his nose. What is it? Sillin asked. Right now, they were flying close to the ground. Sillin was responsible for taking care of the sea beasts blocking their way, while Huimao was responsible for scouting. Eggs. Huimao blinked and chuckled. It really is the smell of eggs. Chapter 253. Where? Sillin asked. This way. Huimao jumped down and ran in a certain direction. Sillin could sense its location, so he wasn't afraid of losing it. Although this area was already in the post-war zone, there were still many sea beasts left. When they saw Sillin and Huimao, these sea beasts swarmed towards them. However, they came to an abrupt halt when they were a dozen or so meters away from Wuxia. Wuxia gave them a very dangerous feeling. These sea beasts weren't stupid, and they were quite wary of Wuxia after it tore a pouncing sea beast into pieces in an instant. However, there were still many sea beasts. Some hesitated for a moment before they were ready to pounce. However, Huimao's roar stopped them. Huimao's roar gave them the feeling of a sea king beast. As for Sillin, because he was very close to Huimao, many sea beasts couldn't find a chance to attack Sillin. However, once Sillin was a little further away from Huimao, these sea beasts wouldn't hesitate to attack. Huimao wandered around the ruins, then pointed at a place and said, "It's here." Underground? Sillin also smelled the smell. Although his sense of smell wasn't as good as Huimao's, it was far more sensitive than the average person. In addition, he smelled the smell from the egg that Huimao spat out. Now Sillin could smell a trace of the same smell from here. Huimao chose a spot and skillfully started to dig. After digging into the ground, Huimao's front claws became mechanized. After stretching out, he dug a hole that was big enough for Sillin to enter. Following behind the gray cat, Sillin took out a disc-shaped instrument and placed it at the entrance of the cave. The disc-shaped instrument expanded with a bang and covered the entire entrance of the cave. It also assimilated itself with the surrounding ruins, so that it was hard to tell from the outside that a hole had been dug at the back. Sillin followed behind Huimao with a breathing mask. Huimao was getting better at digging holes. He was faster than an excavator. Huimao dug very deep. There was still the smell of the Sea King beast around the hole. It was hard to imagine how the Sea King beast could send these eggs so deep underground. Ah, there it is. Huimao shouted excitedly. Thousands of meters underground, there was a pile of eggs. Just like the eggs Wuxia had eaten earlier, there were all kinds of eggs, and they weren't exclusive to sea beasts. Sillin placed his hand on an egg and examined it. These were all undeveloped eggs. If he broke them, it would only be a pool of sticky egg white and yolk. However, after some time, the little life inside the eggs would develop and break out of the shell. Sillin had a rough idea of the Sea King's plan. What is this place? Border defense. This was the third line of defense in the coastal area. The first two lines of defense were also in ruins. At the moment, there was a battle going on at the fourth line of defense. The coastal areas of this planet did not dig deep into the ground. These eggs of different shapes and sizes were all wrapped in a layer of hard material. Just like the egg that Huimao spat out, it could avoid detection. As long as the scanning device did not go within 50 meters of this place, it would be difficult to detect. The metal composition that Sillin analyzed from the skin samples provided by Huimao was inferior to the composition of the various components on the eggs. In other words, the dark blue layer of keratin-like attachment on the eggs had a better composition. However, on the other hand, the attachment on the eggs could not continue to carry out ion exchange. You can't have it both ways. This was why the composition on the Sea King's body was not as perfect as the composition on the eggs. Sillin turned around and saw Huimao swallowing the eggs one after another. Didn't you eat too much? A little, but I've digested a little. It's fine to eat this little bit. These are not as hard to digest as the egg, Huimao said while swallowing the eggs. That egg is hard to digest? Sillin thinks. He thought about the eggs that Huimao spat out in the room. Some of the eggs here looked similar to that egg. However, when Sillin put his finger on these eggs, he knew that even though the outer layer was wrapped in the same attachment, the shell itself was very different. Just like the egg that Huimao spat out, there were only a few eggs in this large pile, no more than 10 in number. Half of the genes of those hard-to-digest eggs are the same as the Sea King, but I don't know the other half, Huimao said while swallowing the eggs. Sillin nodded and put these eggs into the ring with curly leaf patterns. Other than their research value, they could also be used as food for Huimao. However, if these eggs accidentally hatched a small sea monster in the subspace, there would be no other way. There could not be creatures with strong life signals inside. If it was in the form of an egg, it would be fine, but if it was a sea monster, it would cause the subspace to lose stability and collapse. I almost forgot that you have that thing, hee. When Huimao saw that Sillin had put away all the eggs, he smiled happily. This way he didn't have to force himself to swallow the eggs. After cleaning up the place, Sillin said, "Let's go to the next place." Is there more? Huimao's eyes lit up. These were all food. The more the better. There should be. Since the Sea King had hidden sea monster eggs under the third line of defense, there should be at the first and second lines of defense, right? After leaving the cave, Sillin and Huimao went to the second line of defense in this direction. Just as Sillin expected, the second line of defense was also flattened into ruins. It seemed that this was done to cover up the eggs underground and clear all the obstacles around it. Sillin did not smell the eggs here, but he could use the third line of defense as a reference. Sillin and Huimao went deeper into the second line of defense. After searching for a while, they finally found the eggs hidden there. Strangely, there was no egg similar to the one Huimao spat out. Celine inspected some of the eggs. From the looks of it, these eggs had been hidden away during the Great War between humans and beasts decades ago. However, the sea beasts inside had gradually matured. It was just that they still needed some time to fully mature. He believed that these little sea beasts would break out of the soil and join the battle during the next Great War. After the beast died, the second line of defense would be rebuilt, and those eggs would be directly below the line of defense. When the next beast tide came, these eggs would hatch, and they would be able to cooperate with the sea beasts that came out of the sea. But why hadn't there been any young Sea King beasts after all these years? Logically speaking, these hatched little sea monsters would join the battle. But why hadn't they heard of any young Sea King beasts? If the young Sea King beasts were protected in the deep sea, it would be reasonable. But these were all Sea King beasts that had participated in the battle. Could it be that not everyone had seen a young Sea King beast? When Sillin and Huimao arrived at the first line of defense, they knew the answer to this question. The first line of defense was quickly broken in the war between humans and beasts. It was incredibly fast. The heroes of breaking the first line of defense were the hatched little sea monsters hiding underground. It didn't take Sillin and Wheeze long to find the place where the egg was hidden. Wheeze had smelled the scent of an egg breaking, and some sea beasts had crawled out of the hole and disappeared into the sea. They didn't head inland. There are a few that haven't hatched yet. Huimao walked around the eggs. A little sea monster that had just broken its shell was swallowed by Huimao. After swallowing it, it complained about the taste and spat a few times. As soon as Huimao's voice fell, an egg made a cracking sound. Looking at the little sea monster that had just broken its shell, Sillin had a strange feeling. After this little guy came out, it had a fierce look. The small spikes on its back were all erect. Its four limbs were webbed, but they also had sharp claws. Its body was dark blue, and its surface was hard to protect. Its big mouth was full of sharp teeth. After seeing Sillin and Huimao, it didn't rush towards them immediately. Instead, it opened its mouth and shouted. This voice Sea King beast. Although it sounded young, it was indeed the sound of a Sea King beast. How could a young Sea King beast be so different from an adult one? If it was mixed with other sea monsters, it would be really hard to distinguish it. No wonder those people couldn't find a young Sea King beast. As the young Sea King beast shouted, A few eggs next to it that hadn't moved before made a cracking sound, and then they all broke their shells together. There were big-mouthed sea monsters, and some other sea monsters that Sillin had seen when he came over. These newly hatched sea monsters all rushed towards Sillin and Huimao. However, after all, they were young sea monsters, and there weren't many of them. Most of them had already left, and these little ones didn't have much attack power. Soon they were killed by Sillin and Huimao. That young sea king beast was swallowed by Huimao. After swallowing it, Huimao squatted there and didn't move. No one knew what he was thinking. "What's wrong?" Sillin asked. Huimao flicked his tail. "This little guy has all the genes of a sea king beast. It's different from the egg I spat out before. However, I feel that my protruding egg is more difficult to digest." Sillin pondered, but now was not the time to think about it. "Let's go. We'll talk about these things later. The fog is about to disperse. Let's not run into a group of sea monsters. Let's go back to the sea." Sillin and Huimao avoided a large number of sea monsters when they flew inland. When they returned to the residence of the RES, the place was already under martial law. All the windows of the buildings had been opened, and they were no longer tightly shut. Several people from the RES were discussing how to continue negotiating with the minor nobles. They were discussing whether to take tough measures. However, because tough measures would damage the reputation of the RES, they didn't want to take such measures until the last moment. After all, the RES still maintained a good image. When Sillin came back, he didn't communicate with the others. He went straight into his room and didn't come out, saying that he wanted to rest. After entering the room, Huimao made an analysis of the little sea king beast he swallowed. From the analysis, Sillin found that there was a hollow cartilage on the tail of the sea king beast. The cartilage was usually flat and curled, but when stretched, its length was dozens of times longer than the overall height of the sea king beast. Although it was cartilage, it was speculated that the adult sea king beast could harden the cartilage in a short time. The hardened cartilage penetrated deep into the ground, and then sent the egg into a deep hole. The appendages wrapped around the various sea beast eggs belonged to the sea king beast. Those sea beast eggs hidden underground, even if the form inside the egg had been fully formed, would be in a state of hibernation before the attack of the sea beasts. When the sea beasts attacked, the sea king beast's cry would wake them up from their hibernation. After hatching, the baby sea king beast would not immediately come out of the ground. They would feed on other sea beast eggs until the adult sea king beast called them. Only then would these little guys break out of the ground with other hatched sea beasts. Therefore, the adult sea king beast would estimate the time it would take for the eggs to grow, and use that time to attack the land. The sea beasts that lived at the top of the food chain, especially the oviparous ones, were all within the sea king's consideration. The sea king beast would select a portion of its eggs, then wrap each egg with a layer of appendages, and secretly hide these eggs underground when it attacked the land. The first time the sea king beast did this, no one noticed it, so it did the same thing the next 2 times. The first line of defense was broken, and the sea king beast had tasted the sweetness of victory. However, if it wasn't for Sillin discovering the hidden eggs this time, the humans on the planet would have suffered a lot in the next few decades. Sillin had only dug out the eggs in one direction, and there were still eggs buried under the other lines of defense on the continent. However, Sillin didn't have the time to dig them all out. Sillin searched for Stappen through the internet again. Stappen's location had changed. He had probably found some information this time, and was continuing to analyze it. Stappen's analysis narrowed down the search area by a lot, and Sillin discovered that the 3 places where the eggs were hidden were all within Stappen's boundaries. It wasn't just a single place, it was an analysis of the entire continent. It was hard to imagine that a person could come up with a result just based on data alone. If it wasn't for Stappen's analysis, Sillin wouldn't have been able to find these places so quickly. Sillin didn't tell Stappen the answer he had found. Now wasn't the time to talk about this. After a brief conversation with Stappen, Sillin contacted Guanfeng and told him about his findings. Guanfeng would discuss the rest of the details with the people of the RAS. After all, they didn't think that Sillin was qualified to speak to the academicians directly. In the following days, the people of the RAS didn't bother with the minor noble and his planetary government. After the RAS's reinforcements arrived, they started cleaning up the other places where the sea beast eggs were hidden. You've done a great service this time, Sillin. You've made me proud. Guanfeng was smiling so happily that his fox eyes were narrowed into slits. Guanfeng didn't think that Sillin would not only find a better mixture of sea blue gold, but also eliminate the huge hidden danger there. Those old geezers didn't make any progress no matter how much they tried, but Sillin managed to get his hands on a couple of recipes without a word. This also made Guanfeng feel better. Not bad, you're worthy of praise. Guanfeng looked like he was in a pretty good mood. Guanfeng might have a lot of say in the RAS, but he wasn't the only one. Now that Sillin had gotten his hands on the other recipes for sea blue gold, Guanfeng's influence had grown as well. The Abyss Project team owed Guanfeng a huge favor. Of course, they would stand on Guanfeng's side when it came to important decisions. You'll get your reward. Just tell me if you need anything. Just tell me if you have any other requests, Guanfeng said. Can I ask for anything? Sillin asked. Yes, as long as it's within my capabilities. If that's the case, I heard that even an academician of your rank has the right to recommend someone to become an honorary scholar? Guanfeng raised an eyebrow. That's right. Do you want to join? Not really. I want to recommend someone. Sillin told Guanfeng about Stappen. Guanfeng waved his hand and gave his approval. I'll let your team leader know. Come back with me when you find Stappen. I'll take care of the rest. All right. With Guanfeng around, Sillin didn't have to do too many troublesome things. After receiving Guanfeng's promise, Sillin contacted Stappen through the network. Although the fact that the RES had found sea beast eggs near the border hadn't spread, Stappen must have heard about it from the minor noble research groups. Right now, Stappen really wanted to meet Sillin and share his joy with him. This incident had proven his point of view to be correct. Although the public didn't agree with him, Stappen was happy to have a supporter. When Sillin saw Stappen, the latter looked like he was in dire straits. Although Stappen had done his best to tidy himself up, his broken leg and white hair only made him look even more dispirited. It was obvious that Stappen's broken leg had only recently been severed. Right now he was only supported by a simple mechanical leg. Stappen couldn't afford any treatment at his current dire condition. Stappen was also surprised to see Sillin. He didn't think that he would meet such a young person. In Stappen's imagination, this person who could discuss and analyze data with him should be a middle-aged researcher at the very least, right? But the reality was that he was a young man in his early 20s. The duo found a quiet place to talk. Sillin didn't want anyone to hear their conversation, but it didn't matter if they did. It wouldn't change the outcome. After talking about the Sea King for a while, Sillin explained the purpose of his visit. Honorary scholar. Stappen couldn't help but exclaim loudly when he heard Sillin's words. Who wouldn't want to go to the highest temple of academic researchers? Even in their dreams. It was Stappen's dream when he was young, but he had suppressed it after experiencing so many things. It was an extravagant hope that could never be achieved. But now, Sillin was saying that he could give him such a chance. How could Stappen not be excited? Stappen didn't lack ability to live to this day. The only thing he lacked was an opportunity. However, the god of luck never seemed to like him. He was always suppressed and abandoned step by step. Every time Stappen lay exhausted in his simple and crude workshop, he would always think that if he was given a chance, even if it was just a small chance, he would definitely prove himself. He would prove that he was right, that what he was doing was the right thing. The minor noble didn't give him this chance. The research organization didn't give him this chance. But Sillin did. The minor noble would definitely be quite unwilling to bring Stappen to the RES after learning the truth. But could the minor noble not let him go? Did he dare not? He didn't dare. The RES wanted him, and Stappen himself had agreed to it. A minor noble like him didn't have any bargaining chips in his hands right now. He couldn't shake the RES at all. Not only did the minor noble not make things difficult for Stappen after he realized this, he even smiled at him. After all, he came from this planet, from his fief. This was his home. He would still rely on Stappen's analysis and support for the war against the sea beasts in the future. After everything was taken care of. Everyone prepared to return to the capital Star region. However, the day before they were about to leave, 2 academicians were kidnapped while they were out scouting. Of the guards who protected them, 3 were killed, and 10 were injured. 2 of them, who were transferred from the affiliated schools like Sillin, were heavily injured. The people of the RES were furious, and the minor noble couldn't sleep at all. Kidnapping someone from the RES on his own turf? It was going to be hard for him to get out of this mess. He had just finished the war against the sea beasts, only to run into this mess again. The minor noble was about to lose all his hair. The naval equipment on the planet was pretty good, but the equipment in other areas wasn't. There was no surveillance footage, so it was obvious that the kidnappers had come prepared. Moreover, they weren't residents of this planet. The person who could injure the guards without making a sound couldn't be weak either. Their plan was very thorough. Not long after the 2 academicians went missing, they received a message. Who would have thought that the kidnappers were after the sea blue gold? Normally, the best sea blue gold recipe wasn't made public, and the ones that were made public weren't the best ones. However, the RES had obtained more than one recipe this time, and all of them were very high level. It would probably take at least 3 to 5 years for them to be made public. Not to mention that there was a super recipe that was known as the perfect sea blue gold. Sea blue gold had a wide range of uses, and different ratios had different functions. The fact that Guanfeng needed sea blue gold to develop the Purgatory Thunder Snake S proved how valuable it was. Every high-level sea blue gold recipe would sell for an astronomical price on the black market. It wasn't strange that someone was after it. What was strange was that the kidnappers had gone against the RES directly. Was it the work of a certain noble, or the rioters? For now, there was no conclusion. The planet was quickly locked down after the 2 academicians went missing. Even the surrounding planets were mobilized to guard the place. The Mist Bodhisattva royal family also sent people to investigate. There weren't many people who knew about the true sea blue gold recipe. When Sillin gave the recipe to Guanfeng, the latter must have communicated with a few important people in the RES. Therefore, the only people who knew about the recipe were Sillin, Guanfeng, the project manager of the Abyss, and a few leaders of the RES. Everyone else, including the 2 kidnapped academicians, didn't know about it. However, the 2 of them were important figures in the Abyss project, so they couldn't be ignored. The RES was doing their best to find them. The Mist Bodhisattva Emperor had decreed that the sea blue gold recipe must not be leaked. There were a lot of rioters in the Empire. If they learned about the latest sea blue gold recipe, it would undoubtedly bring a lot of trouble to the Empire. Although some things weren't stated openly, Sillin could guess a few things. After all, the Empire spanned more than 20 star regions. How could it possibly be a united front? The poisonous insects, hiding in the shadows, would come out and wreak havoc whenever they had the chance. Guanfeng wouldn't tell anyone who knew the recipe, and the person in charge of the Abyss project was backed by the royal family. That being said, Sillin was a different story since he was a native of the imperial capital. The RES didn't dare do anything to Guanfeng because he was his backer. All they could do was guard him closely. Sillin was trapped inside a building like he was in a prison cell. To put it nicely, he was being protected. Right now, it was rumored that Sillin had leaked information about the sea blue gold recipe. There were a lot of people who disliked Sillin, and a lot of people who were jealous of him. There were definitely a lot of people who wanted to smear Sillin's name. Although a lot of people didn't believe it, the rumor didn't change the fact that Sillin was under heavy surveillance. There were even more people who disliked Guanfeng. However, although Sillin was Guanfeng's student, and Sillin was rumored to have leaked the recipe, no one dared to say that Guanfeng had anything to do with it. Those who did were killed in secret. Who was Guanfeng? He was the emperor's tutor, and even the current Mist Bodhisattva emperor would defend him. Why would someone as experienced as Guanfeng do something so stupid? Therefore, anyone who wronged Guanfeng was seen as malicious slander, and slandering the emperor's tutor no less. Therefore, those who wanted to but didn't dare to smear Guanfeng's name directly targeted Sillin. The rumors against Sillin grew more and more numerous. In order to prevent the kidnappers from escaping, no one was allowed to leave the area. Therefore, the reinforcements didn't leave to prevent the kidnappers from escaping. If anyone tried to leave by force, they would definitely be attacked as kidnappers. Therefore, Guanfeng's original plan to send Sillin back to the capital was rejected by the higher-ups just to be safe. Now, Sillin could only be guarded by layers of guards in a room that was 100 square meters in size. He wanted nothing more than to eat, drink, and go to the bathroom. Sillin wasn't allowed to touch the internet, and his communicator was confiscated. Huimao and Sillin were locked up together. It couldn't let Sillin eat the eggs even if someone was watching over it. All day long, it lay in Sillin's arms, waiting to be pacified. Although Guanfeng couldn't revoke Sillin's guardianship order, he did a lot of work. One day, Sillin woke up and saw his senior brother, Pastura, and senior sister, Fu Qingqing. Pastura's presence meant that the Imperial Guards sent to assist in the investigation would show him some respect. Fu Qingqing's presence meant that the Imperial Guards sent to assist in the investigation would be more careful as well. As for Goryo, Pastura said that the kid was still on his way here. Everyone Sillin came into contact with was under surveillance, not even Pastura or Fu Qingqing. That being said, they could achieve their goal even if they didn't say a word. After all, they were here to hold the fort. Guanfeng couldn't come. He was one of the few insiders, so he stayed at the RAS with a few others. That was why he sent Pastura, Fu Qingqing, and Goryo to back up Sillin. His disciple wasn't someone anyone could bully. Even if he was confined to 100 square meters or so, the person in charge of the guards had to treat him with respect. Sillin was very grateful for Guanfeng's help, but there was another person besides Guanfeng who had come over. Zhen Xingqian and his men showed up the second day after Pastura and Fu Qingqing arrived. It looked like they were here to back up Sillin as well. Chapter 254. A lot of people could understand why Pastura, Fu Qingqing and the others had come over. They were brothers and disciples of Guanfeng after all. But why did the Zhen family come over? Zhen Xingqian was the next successor to King Fuji's throne. Right now, Zhen Xingqian's every action represented the entire Zhen family, and the current King Fuji was slowly ceding power to Sillin. Therefore, Zhen Xingqian's arrival silenced a lot of people while they were still gossiping about Guanfeng and Sillin's wrongdoings, and making wild guesses about Sillin and Guanfeng. They could talk about the royal family in their hearts, but they couldn't say it out loud. At the same time, many people's attention had shifted from the sea blue gold leak to Sillin. The previous King Fuji, Zhen Xingqian's grandfather, Zhen Liao, wasn't a good-tempered man. It was an open secret among the upper echelons that Zhen Liao and Guanfeng didn't share a good relationship. Many people knew that Zhen Xingyao, Zhen Xingming and the others had suffered a lot at Guanfeng's hands when they were still in the affiliated schools. Guanfeng would more or less feed them more or less. After all, Guanfeng's influence in the affiliated schools was pretty big, and his identity as a royal prince wasn't going to give Zhen Xingming and the others any advantage. It seemed that no one with the word Zhen in their name, or anyone with a Zhen family tag in their name, had ever fared well in Guanfeng's hands. Among the students Guanfeng had personally taught over the years, the Zhen family was the only one that didn't have a student of Guanfeng's. Moreover, Guanfeng wouldn't show up where Zhen Liao was, and Zhen Liao wouldn't go where Guanfeng was. Even if the two of them had to go together, they would treat each other like complete strangers. There was no sense of politeness between them at all. It was as if looking at each other for an extra moment would hurt their eyes. Who would have thought that both sides would show up for a greenhorn like Sillin at the same time? It was good enough that the Zhen family didn't slander Sillin after what happened to Guanfeng's student. Why would they show up to support Sillin? Unfortunately, he was here to hold the fort. The Imperial Guard and the Joint Garrison Army's eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets when they saw Zhen Xingqian talking to Sillin in a friendly manner. Zhen Xingyao and Zhen Xingming didn't come with them this time. Zhen Xingqian was the only one who came with the Zhen family. Inside the room, Sillin, Pastura, Fu Qingqing, Goryo, and Zhen Xingqian were sitting around a table. Zhen Xingqian didn't make things difficult for Pastura and the others. His attitude was neither warm nor cold, but he was smiling at Sillin. Through his conversation with them, Sillin learned the reason why they were guarded so strictly. At first, They thought that sea blue gold wouldn't be too important even if it was an upgrade recipe, but things seemed to have escalated when Sillin handed over the latest recipes. Moreover, the higher-ups were definitely hiding something important from them. Pastura and the others' expressions told them that they must know something, but they weren't allowed to talk about it carelessly. After all, they were under surveillance right now. Their conversation would be monitored, so Zhen Xingqian didn't reveal his secrets to Sillin. However, he did drop a bomb on him. After this is over, my grandfather wants to see you. He originally wanted to come over immediately, but the current situation is a little complicated, so he can only wait for this matter to pass. Everyone's first reaction was, bullshit. Their second reaction was, how is that possible? Their third reaction was, Sillin is a member of the Zhen family. Pastura shot Sillin a glance. He was sure that Guanfeng knew about Sillin's background, and there was no way he would accept a student who was related to the Zhen family. He didn't know the truth, but he believed that his teacher must have his reasons. Zhen Xingqian's words weren't just for Sillin. They were for the other eavesdroppers as well. How dare you not treat someone the previous King Fuji wants to protect? Goryo and Fu Qingqing exchanged a glance with each other. It looks like Sillin wouldn't have suffered any grievances even if they hadn't shown up. Our little junior brother sure hid his strength well. The previous King Fuji's visit to Sillin was within Sillin's expectations. He already had this speculation after meeting Zhen Xingqian. Is this finally going to end after so many years? After the group left, Sillin went back to his bedroom and leaned against a chair to read a book. Huimao crouched on top of the egg he had spat out earlier. He had been very bored lately, but he didn't have much of an appetite. The eggs he had eaten a few days ago were enough to last him for a while. However, he was annoyed at being locked up in a crappy place like this. So Sillin tossed the egg to Huimao to play with. He could eat it if he got tired of playing with it. The surface of the egg wasn't smooth, so Huimao was able to scratch himself on it. That was why the egg had become Huimao's favorite pastime. Every time he saw Huimao dozing off on top of the egg, Sillin felt like he was a cat sitting on top of an egg, even though the ratio between the two was very different right now. Since there were a lot of people supporting him, Sillin had fewer restrictions on his movements inside the building. However, the outer layer of the building was still heavily guarded. Sillin had a feeling that this lineup wasn't just because they were afraid that Sillin would leak the recipe. It was more like they were guarding Sillin himself. Was he being watched by someone? Sillin had always trusted his instincts. He had a feeling that there was a pair of eyes watching him from the shadows, waiting to strike when he was caught off guard. This person must have something to do with the decision made by the higher-ups and the information Pastura and the others couldn't reveal. Sillin didn't understand why he was being targeted by someone. He might be Guanfeng's student, but he shouldn't have the right to receive such treatment, should he? That was why Sillin asked his question when Goryo came to visit him the next day. Am I being watched by someone? Goryo was surprised by Sillin's question for a moment before smiling helplessly. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. He let out a long sigh before asking. You're the one who discovered it, aren't you? Sillin knew that Goryo was referring to the sea blue gold recipes, so he nodded. That's right. Even if I can't get my hands on it, it's still possible to get you there. Sillin frowned. Wasn't this a little too arrogant? Wasn't this openly opposing the Empire? Not to mention opposing the RES. No, there were people who didn't care about opposing the nobles and the RES. Not every new technology was under the control of the RES. There were always people who didn't want to join the RES or work for the nobles. Instead, they formed their own organization and scattered themselves all over the Empire. They were also the biggest headache the Empire had been unable to clean out for a very long time. Black Viper. Black Viper was the biggest dark force in the Empire. It had existed for a very long time, and every missed Bodhisattva emperor would do his best to clean out Black Viper's organizations, but to little avail. Every time Black Viper's forces were wiped out on a large scale, some nobles would always be dragged into the mix. That was the biggest headache. They obeyed the orders of the nobles, but some of them were willing to fall into their trap. The people of Black Viper were always unscrupulous. They could turn a prosperous planet into a dead one, sell drugs or bacteria that the Empire strictly prohibited, and they would never be caught. Sillin hadn't fought against Black Viper before, but his 3 senior brothers and sisters had. That was why Pastura and the other 2 weren't just here to support Sillin. They were here to protect Sillin as well. After all, it was better to trust one's own people more. Goryo glanced at Sillin's expression and guessed that the young man understood what he was going to say. He patted Sillin's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, we're all here." Sillin rolled his eyes at him. "I'm not afraid. Wait for 5 more days. If we can't find those people by then, we'll take you back to the imperial capital." Before leaving, Goryo shot a glance at Huimao, who was sleeping on top of the egg with its eyes closed. He asked Sillin, "Is the cat hatching the egg?" "Yeah." Goryo imagined Huimao hatching the egg and eating the newborn sea beast. It was strange no matter how he thought about it. Felines were indeed eccentric. While sending Goryo off, Sillin suddenly looked outside the window as if he sensed something. "What are you looking at?" Goryo followed Sillin's line of sight and saw only a few buildings that looked the same. They weren't very tall, and there was nothing out of the ordinary about them. Nothing, just looking at the scenery outside. "It's been a long time since I last went out." "You brat. It hasn't even been 10 days. Back then, Teacher Guan held a gun to my head and forced me to reflect on my mistakes for more than 20 days. You're already doing a good job." Goryo punched him with a smile. "Just wait a little longer, I'm almost there." After Goryo left, Sillin shot another glance in that direction before moving his gaze away. He flicked Huimao's ear and said, "Let's go. We're going to sleep in the room." Huimao opened his eyes. He didn't look sleepy or lazy at all. Instead, he looked like he was suppressing some kind of excitement. He kicked the egg off the table with his paw, jumped off the table, and rolled the egg toward the resting room. Fortunately, the egg was very sturdy. A normal egg would have turned into a mess after 2 or 3 kicks. Every time Sillin saw Whis abuse the egg, he would wonder if the final egg really hatched a sea beast. Would the sea beast suffer from congenital concussion? A pair of eyes suddenly appeared on the roof of a residential building not far from the one Sillin was staying in. Its back was facing Sillin. Another 4 days passed after Goryo spoke to Sillin. The investigation hadn't made any progress during this time, and it was as if the 2 kidnapped scholars had vanished into thin air. "It's tomorrow, isn't it?" Huimao crouched on the egg and asked Sillin. "Yeah." Sillin looked out the window. Huimao wagged his tail and muttered, "Why isn't it showing up yet?" "Soon." Pastura and the others were sitting in the building next door, but the atmosphere was very serious. The closer it was to the deadline, the more vigilant they needed to be. This was the experience they'd gained after coming into contact with Black Viper. In front of the 3 of them was a surveillance feed of Sillin's room. Even Sillin's room was being monitored. On the feed, Sillin was talking to Huimao and scratching Huimao's chin. Zhen Xingchen's room wasn't too far away from Sillin's building. He was sitting on a chair and going through some documents. Even though he wasn't in the imperial capital or the Zhen family's headquarters, there were still some things he needed to take care of. This was what the would-be king of Fuji had to do, and it was called government affairs. "Your Highness, Haturiai is here." A subordinate came in to report. Haturiai was one of Zhen Xingchen's subordinates. Zhen Xingchen had ordered him and a few others to investigate Black Viper. Haturiai must have returned for something important. "Let him in." Zhen Xingchen didn't even look up from the document in his hand. After Haturiai came in, the tall, muscular man saluted Zhen Xingchen respectfully and said, "Your Highness, there's news." Due to Zhen Xingchen's identity, this building and its surroundings were all Zhen family members. The other guards wouldn't set foot in this area. Zhen Xingchen walked out of the building with Haturiai and a few other servants behind him. He signaled the Zhen family guards to stay put and go to Sillin's room. Since the deadline was approaching, the security around Sillin's building had tightened. When Zhen Xingchen arrived, he was the only one allowed to enter, just like the last few times. The others had to wait outside. Hatu Lei and the other 4 attendants did not have a good attitude towards the guards outside. And the guards outside also pretended not to see them. Everyone had their own masters to do their jobs, and it was none of their business if they were unhappy. This was an order from above, and we only needed to obey. When Zhen Xingchen arrived at Silin's room, Silin and Huimao were rolling the egg around like a ball. Seeing Zhen Xingchen, Silin looked up and smiled. "You're here." Huimao's claws left a few scratches on the egg and rubbed them together. Zhen Xingchen nodded and pulled over a chair to sit down. "I received the news today, so I came to inform you so that you can prepare." "Prepare for what?" Silin stood up and faced Zhen Xingchen. "Today might not be so peaceful." "Is that so?" Silin pushed the sea beast egg to a corner and ignored Huimao's protests. He looked at Zhen Xingchen and said, "I know it won't be peaceful either." The moment he said this, Silin's hand flashed with silver light and slashed at Zhen Xingchen like a bolt of lightning. Zzzt. The smiling Zhen Xingchen was cut in half, but there wasn't a single drop of blood. The part that was cut open wasn't flesh, but metal, being split in two after the sound of electricity. This person was a robot. Not to mention that the scanners in the building hadn't detected anything at all. Pastura and the others next door saw everything that happened on Silin's side very clearly. Something's wrong. Black Viper is on the move. The three of them jumped out of the window at the same time and fired at almost the same time. The 5 people who came with Zhen Xingchen were shot in the forehead almost at the same time, but none of them bled. Moreover, they were able to move normally and evade the attacks even after being shot. All 5 of them were robots as well. At the same time, on Zhen Xingchen's side, Zhen Xingchen walked up to the badly deformed robot that had been turned into a pile of scrap metal. After taking a look at it, he put away his gun and walked out while stepping on the robot's head. His subordinates were already on the move. Who would have thought that Black Viper would send robots this time? The peaceful area was instantly engulfed in the flames of war the moment the anomaly began. Robots and mechanical animals swarmed out of the surrounding buildings. Not only could Black Viper's robots avoid detection by the scanners, they could also change their forms. They weren't robots that were completely controlled by humans, but more like trained agents and assassins. One of the robots transformed into a leopard after its arm was chopped off, and leaped around to avoid gunfire. Their movements were agile and difficult to lock onto. Pastura leaped past the soldiers and landed on a protruding corner of the building in a couple of jumps, firing repeatedly with a backhand. 3 shots, 3 hits. The bullets pierced the chests of 3 robots and exploded, reducing them to scrap metal. "Where's Silin?" Pastura asked the guards who came out of the building where Silin was. "I didn't see him, he's gone." "Fuck. Find him." "Yes, sir." The guards were all on high alert when they saw Zhen Xingchen. They let out a sigh of relief when they learned that this was the real Zhen Xingchen, and not a robot. They were a little confused. These robots could change their forms and make it difficult for people to notice them. The soldiers tensed up even more when Fu Qingqing found out that some of them had hidden among the soldiers and shot arrows at them. They didn't know if the person behind them was a robot or not, and they all suspected that it was an accident. These robots were very cunning. They constantly changed their forms from robots to different people, and shuttled through this group of people at an extremely fast speed. They would even collect human blood and smear it on their bodies when they turned into people to confuse their vision. Their goal is to stall us. Let's not waste our time here. Our main goal is to find Silin, Pastura said to Fu Qingqing and Goryo. All right. Fu Qingqing and Goryo decisively withdrew from the fight and left the situation to the Imperial Guards and the Allied garrison. Zhen Xingchen also sent his men to find Silin. His identity didn't allow him to act as he pleased like Pastura and the others. Therefore, the only thing Zhen Xingchen could do right now was to settle the situation as best as he could. The Zhen family guards followed Zhen Xingchen closely and didn't give the robots a chance at all. Everyone else who got too close to Zhen Xingchen was treated as a suspect and executed. That was why the robots couldn't find a chance to cause trouble for Zhen Xingchen. Many of the surrounding buildings were damaged and riddled with holes, but most of the residents had evacuated by the time the garrison arrived. Therefore, there weren't many innocent casualties. The robots were fully equipped, and they didn't seem to be tired at all. Laser beams and cannons clashed with each other. The laser beams arced through the air like the feet of a crab before crashing down and shaking the ground. The war zone expanded, and the nearby residents and planetary government personnel hurriedly fled the area lest they get caught in the crossfire. The flames of war were burning fiercely here, and Selene was in hot pursuit. Chapter 255. After Silin killed the fake Genxingchen, a person who looked exactly like the missing academician appeared not far away from Silin's window. No, it should be called a robot that had transformed into the missing academician. The robot ran away after seeing Silin kill the fake Genxingchen, and Silin chased after it. Silin didn't use a hoverboard. Instead, he jumped from the rooftops of the residential buildings like the robot did. There were too many restrictions in the air, and it was too chaotic. The slightest carelessness would make him a target for everyone. No matter how agile a hoverboard was, it couldn't compare to Silin himself. Therefore, it was better for Silin to use his own legs for safety's sake. The robot was very fast. Unlike humans who had a breathing limit, it could keep running at the same speed as long as it had enough energy. Moreover, it had great jumping ability. It was able to jump from one rooftop to another without a hitch. Every jump was flawless, as if it had been made with precise calculations. The robot wasn't just fast, it was also running in tricky places. However, it didn't run towards crowded areas. Instead, it ran towards the outskirts of the city. Logically speaking, the robot could have easily fooled the army by turning into a human at will. But it didn't. Outside the city, there was a large desert. This desert was like a natural line of defense. Even if the sea beasts managed to attack inland, they would be severely hindered by this desert. The sea beasts couldn't live without water, and the desert environment was the sea beasts' least favorite environment. Therefore, there wasn't much human activity in the desert other than the observation stations that were set up at regular intervals. It was incredibly empty. This desert was the robot's target. There was a tracker installed on Silin, so Silin would receive a signal no matter where he went. Pastura and the others could easily track him down. But now, Pastura stared at the screen in his hand, but there was no signal at all. This meant that the tracker's signal had been blocked, and neither the satellite's global scan nor his WeChat ID were picking up any activity. Senior brother, the satellites and global scanning have been tampered with. They're temporarily paralyzed. Goryo reported to Pastura through the communicator. How long will it take to recover? I don't know. The technicians haven't made any progress yet. I've contacted Teacher Guan, and someone from the Royal Academy of Sciences will be remotely guiding the repair process, but I'm not sure when it'll be completed. All right, hurry up and find it. It's over there in the desert. All right. Pastura had just received news that Silin was seen running towards the desert, but he didn't know where exactly. He was too fast to catch up to. Right now, Pastura and the others were cursing Silin 1,000 times in their minds. The bastard really was a troublesome person. How many times had they told him not to leave their sight, and what did he get in the end? As soon as the incident happened, that guy ran away without a trace. Wasn't he afraid of being kidnapped too? Pastura didn't like Silin very much, but he still did his best to search for him. He was his junior brother after all, and he wouldn't be able to explain himself if something really happened to Silin. After Silin entered the desert, he gradually began to be attacked. There were a lot of robots hiding in the desert, robot scorpions, robot lizards, robot eagles, and so on. Moreover, they could change their body color, so that they would be in line with their surroundings. Not only could they change their color, but they could also turn invisible. That being said, being invisible was nothing to Silin. He could see the invisible robots. These robots used magnetic fields to distort the air around them to turn invisible, but Silin was very sensitive to magnetic fields. He could detect even the slightest change in the magnetic field if Silin thinks he's paying attention. Silin dodged the laser bullets fired by the robots as he ran. He blocked the ones he couldn't dodge with his longsword. There weren't many blades that could block laser bullets, and Silin's was one of them. Silin waved his hand and cut a charging mechanical lizard in half, before jumping away with his right foot. The next moment, a corroded hole appeared where he was standing. The yellow sand let out sizzling sounds as it melted and turned black. Silin cut into the sand with his sword before he hit the ground, and picked out the thing hidden underneath. It was a thin snake 1/2 meter long, the same color as the sand. It spat venom at Silin's open mouth when Silin picked it up. Sillin sidestepped the venom and cut the snake in half. The two halves of the snake's body revealed a mechanical form. It was a robot snake. A mechanical snake actually hid such a tyrannical venom. It looked like these robots had other tricks up their sleeves besides the weapons they carried with them. A gale blew past and covered the sky with sand, but the battle was still going on. The robots wouldn't stop attacking just because of the sand. Sillin was dodging and killing, but he still had to chase after the figure in front of him. It was indeed difficult. After leaving the city, the figure suddenly stopped and turned to look at Sillin. As it turned around, the appearance of the robot changed from the old academician to a beautiful woman. Her eyes were full of charm, and the V-shaped opening in front of her chest revealed her plump breasts. "I didn't expect you to be able to chase me all the way here." Even the voice was full of charm. Sillin stood not far away from it. He didn't even look behind him and cut a robot scorpion in half with his sword. "Isn't this your goal? Why did you lead me here?" "You really don't know?" The robot chuckled softly and slowly lowered its eyes. "Actually, I wanted to get the other formulas of sea blue gold from you, but now, Master has changed his mind." After the robot finished speaking, it raised its eyes again. At the same time, the desert behind it started to move. Protrusions started to appear on the sand, and they started to converge. When they rushed out of the sand, they slowly turned into human shapes. Almost all of them were people Sillin had seen before. There were also a lot of familiar faces: Pastura, Fuqingqing, Goryo, Guanfeng, Zhenxingchen. Sillin stared at the formation without much emotion on his face or in his eyes. He simply cut down the robots one by one when they charged at him. The robot understood human psychology very well. Actually, for people, even if they knew that the people in front of them weren't the real ones, they still had the same faces and many of their eyes were so similar. It was hard not to be traumatized when they personally cut them in half. However, Sillin's hands were steady, and he swung his sword cleanly without any hesitation. It was as if he didn't know these faces at all. A machine was a machine, and it was different from a human being. Even if it had taken on a human face, even if its gaze was just a little bit similar, that was all it was. It could not be replaced. In Sillin's eyes, they were two planes that could not be overlapped. There was no intersection. Old people, children, familiar faces. Sillin's eyes didn't waver in the slightest when he cut them in half. TSK, I think you're more like a robot than we are," the original robot said. "All right, I think it's time for us to talk." The robot waved its hand, and the other robots stopped attacking Sillin and retreated. Sillin sheathed his sword and stood there just like before. All that was left were the hissing mechanical bodies on the ground. They don't know the sea blue gold formula at all, so it's useless even if you capture them. "The Empire and RES won't tell you anything," Sillin said. The robot knew that Sillin was talking about the two RES academicians who were kidnapped, but it didn't answer the question directly. Instead it asked, "You've been on this planet for more than 10 days now, and you've witnessed the war between humans and beasts. You must know the average combat power and military equipment of this planet." Sillin just looked at it and didn't say anything. He didn't know what this guy was trying to say. The robot continued, "The weapons of the people here are several levels lower than the weapons of the RES Weapons Research Institute. In the past, that minor noble was in charge alone, and he's always been on guard against the interference of other forces from outside the planet, even though the residents of this planet have always been living in the chaos of war. Of course, after a long period of brainwashing, the residents who don't know the level of development outside the planet have no complaints. The war has made them numb. However, after this time, their thinking will change." The robot stretched out its hand, and a projector in its palm projected a 5-meter-long and 3-meter-wide screen. The screen displayed the current battle in the city. It was a battle between 3 armies and robots. The flashing beams of light and particle cannons were extremely beautiful, and even the locals who were avoiding the battlefield could see the scene from afar. The screen that popped up from the robot's other hand was showing the battle between the locals and the sea beasts. Sillin had seen this before. Obviously, there was a gap. This was the gap. It's like a person living in a remote mountainous area. As long as they don't come into contact with the outside world, they won't feel that they're poor or backward. But when the outside world breaks the peace of this small mountainous area in the name of supporting the weak and supporting development, the people here will realize their poverty and experience the so-called inferiority complex. Perhaps at this time, the residents hiding in the distance will think, if they have such weapons and equipment, will they still be bullied by the sea beasts? You talk too much, Sillin said. He didn't have any other thoughts because of what the robot said. Once a person started to feel emotional, they would be shaken. After being shaken once, there would be a second time. Then the robot would bring up another topic to drive Sillin's emotions, and then slowly pry open Sillin's psychological defenses. The robot looked at Sillin's reaction and smiled helplessly. You really are more like a primitive type robot. Primitive type? Does that mean you're an evolved type? Sillin said. The robot said proudly, yes, we're evolved type robots. We have the thoughts of a human, but the abilities of a robot. Following the robot's voice, the robot that was split in half by Sillin joined back together. Then, the cut gradually began to repair, and the repaired parts were not visible at all. However, the robots that were split in half from the head did not move. Sillin raised his hand and shot the head of a robot that had just recovered. Bang! The bullet that was shot into the robot's head caused a partial explosion, and the entire robot's head was blown to pieces. The robot that had lost its head stood there and reacted mechanically for a moment. And then there was no movement. In the beautiful robot's eyes, Sillin's action was a provocation. I don't want to waste time. You don't have any sincerity at all, Sillin said slowly. Sincerity? The originally angry robot quickly turned into a smile. Are you willing to give me the recipe of the sea blue gold? I want to see those two people, Sillin said. It wasn't I want to see, but I want to see. From this sentence, one could tell that Sillin was quite domineering. Sure. The beautiful robot reached out her hand, and the image on the light screen showed the old academician sealed in 2 transparent cabins. He seemed to have fainted. After seeing the image, Sillin shook his head. I don't believe your image. It's too easy for you robots to tamper with this. I believe that the reason why the 3 armies can't find me now is because of you guys messing with the communication detection network. You're quite cunning. I also don't believe that you would tell me the recipe of the sea blue gold so easily. The beautiful robot retracted her hand and said, how much credibility does Black Viper have? Sillin countered. The beautiful robot stared at Sillin for 5 seconds and suddenly smiled. Okay, I'll take you there. As soon as her voice fell, the beautiful robot turned into an eagle and flew away. This time, Sillin used the hoverboard and followed the eagle. The eagle took Sillin to a sand dune in the desert, landed on the sand dune, and then let out an eagle cry. After the eagle cry, a part of the sand dune began to change. 1/3 of the sand dune turned into 2 large robots that were curled up in a protective posture around 2 transparent cabins. The 2 old academicians were inside the transparent cabins. Although they were unconscious, Sillin could see the pulse on their wrists. Judging from their pulse and blood pressure, they were just in a normal coma and weren't in any life-threatening danger. Now that you've seen it, show me your sincerity, said the eagle who landed on the sand dune. The eagle looked in a certain direction as soon as he finished speaking. The entire sand dune began to change at the same time. 2/3 of the sand dune had turned into various robots. They were the ones who had transformed this sand dune. In the direction the eagle was looking at, Pastura was pulling a 1-man airship toward them. Goryo and Fu Qingqing were following closely behind Pastura. The eagle wasn't nervous or angry at the fact that Pastura and the other 2 had chased after him. Instead, he smiled. Your senior brothers and sisters are here, kid. What do you think will happen if they run into my subordinates? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.